Your mind is entering a calmer space.
Settle down. Your mind is clearing. Only calm remains.
Snow drifts against the low-timbered door of a cottage on the outskirts of York, and you feel the cold seep through the soles of your boots long before you step inside. It is December 1297, and the whole village seems to hold its breath as another bitter night settles in. Smoke trails lazily from a single hearth inside, too thin to promise real heat, and the wind hisses through the gaps in the wattle walls as if the house itself is whispering warnings you probably won't survive this. Women move quietly around you, shawls drawn tight, their breath visible even indoors. A child coughs in the corner. A pot simmers with more hope than ingredients. Every sound, creaking rafters, snapping twigs underfoot, the muted thud of snow rolling off the roof, reminds you that winter is less a season and more a siege. Before we begin, warm yourself however you can. Tonight you're stepping into a world where medieval winter isn't romantic. It's relentless. Where the cold inside a home can be indistinguishable from the cold outside. And where women, despite doing nearly everything to keep a household alive, are the ones who froze first, longest, and most often. If you're watching this from somewhere warm, enjoy it. And if you're already bundled up, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Your own little beacon of warmth in this frosty time warp. And finally, settle in, breathe slow, and let the medieval winter unfold around you. You push deeper into the room, and the cold presses close, almost curious about you. The floor beneath your feet is hard-packed earth, uneven and scattered with the faint crunch of frost that's crept indoors. Your cloak doesn't help much, not when the wind comes through the doorframe like an uninvited guest. You're surrounded by familiar shapes of medieval living, yet everything feels sharper, harsher, as if winter has stripped away all softness and left only the bare essentials. A woman kneels by the hearth, coaxing the fire with hands already red from cold. The flames lick upward but give off so little heat that you almost laugh, except your face feels too stiff for that kind of enthusiasm. Fire in medieval homes is more symbolic than functional, a tiny pocket of warmth surrounded by oceans of freezing air. It's like standing beside a candle and expecting it to heat the entire countryside. Yet women stay here, hour after hour, because if the fire dies, everything else dies with it. You catch the scent of smoke, sharp, woody, comforting in theory but irritating in reality as it curls into your throat. Medieval homes lack chimneys, so smoke snakes through the rafters, burns your eyes, stains everything black, and still doesn't deliver the heat you'd expect. A medieval winter is a masterclass in disappointment. A man walks in briefly, stomping snow off his boots, his face flushed from being outdoors. Yet somehow, he looks warmer than the women who have been inside all day. He lingers near the fire for only a moment before heading back out. His tasks are out there. Hunting, trading, watching the livestock, negotiating with neighbours. He gets movement. He gets circulation. Meanwhile, the women working in this frigid room got none of that. They work in stillness, which is the enemy of warmth. Medieval winter loves still people. A pot hangs above the fire, its contents bubbling weakly. You lean slightly over it, hoping for warmth, but the steam vanishes into the roof beams and leaves your fingers as numb as before. The woman stirring the pot gives you a look that says this is normal. Don't expect miracles. You glance around and see thin walls made of woven sticks plastered with mud, the texture uneven, cracked in places where heat has escaped for years with no intention of returning. The roof, thatched and aging, lets drafts fall like invisible waterfalls. Women move through this environment as though the cold is a permanent resident. Their layers of clothing, wool, linen, shawls, aprons, rustle faintly as they work. But each layer is just a polite suggestion to the weather, not an actual barrier. You spot another woman spinning wool near the wall where the drafts hit hardest. She doesn't complain. She just pulls her shawl tighter and keeps working, her fingers stiffening as she tries to keep the spindle moving smoothly. You half expect the wool to protest being handled in such conditions, but it dutifully spins on, becoming the fabric that everyone else depends on. The irony isn't lost on you. She freezes while making clothes meant to keep others warm. You turn toward the door again when a gust of wind pushes it inward, sending a blast of icy air through the room. A young girl rushes to secure it, putting her weight against the wood until the gust passes. You can tell she's the unofficial draft fighter of the household, stationed to guard against every whim of the wind. Her cheeks are red, nose dripping, but she's quick and efficient, clearly experienced. You try to imagine your own modern heating bill, then realise these people would sell their souls for a radiator. The fire crackles unevenly, sending up little sparks that die before they reach the air above. You move closer, hoping to feel even a hint of warmth. But it's only a suggestion of heat, a polite handshake from the hearth, rather than the enveloping hug you crave. Women sit right next to it for hours and still freeze. The heat simply doesn't radiate far, trapped by the shape of the hearth, the moisture in the air, and the structural flaws of the house. You almost find yourself wanting to interview the fire about its work ethic. The smells of the room tell their own story. Damp wool, smoke-saturated walls, the metallic note of cold iron tools, the earthy aroma of soil beneath your feet, and the faint scent of onions from the simmering pot. These aren't unpleasant, just deeply lived in, grounding you in a world where comfort takes a back seat to survival. Every task, from tending the fire to preparing food, happens in a state of constant cold, and there's no escape. You can't step outside to warm up. Outside is worse. You can't go to another room because other rooms don't have heat. This is the warmest place you'll find, and it's still cold enough to bite. A woman comes in carrying a bundle of firewood so small it makes you blink. That's it. That's the firewood allowance for the evening. Firewood is precious, rationed carefully through winter so it lasts until spring. Women often get the smallest share, not in a deliberate act of cruelty, but through a hierarchy that makes perfect sense to everyone in the room except your frozen modern self. The men who work outdoors must return to warmth to dry their clothes. The elders need the fire for their joints. Children need it for survival. And the women, they get whatever heat is left. It isn't much. You glance at the woman who brought the wood. She's shaking the snow off her shawl, fingers trembling. She warms them briefly over the fire, and you watch her expression soften for just a moment. This tiny flame is enough to revive her spirit, but not enough to revive her body. She places the wood carefully onto the stack, adds one twig-thin piece to the hearth, and returns to work. She doesn't take a break. Rest is a luxury reserved for people who aren't holding the household together. A baby starts to cry, sharp, immediate, piercing. The mother scoops the child up, her hands shaking visibly as she tries to soothe it. Feeding an infant in winter is a practical nightmare. Layers must be shifted, skin exposed to freezing air, and the mother herself loses what little body heat she's been conserving. You watch her settle near the wall, swaddling the infant in multiple layers, her own shoulders hunched as she tries to shield the child's face from the cold. Your breath fogs as you watch. You didn't expect that indoors. You move aside as another woman drags a bucket toward the fire. The water inside has a thin layer of ice on top. You stare at it in disbelief. Water freezing inside the home. She chips at it casually, as though it's a normal part of her day. Because it is. Every corner tells a story of endurance. Every woman here lives on the edge of frost, navigating household duties that drag her into the coldest parts of medieval life. While men travel, move, and exert themselves, women stay still, anchored in interior spaces that are somehow colder than the snowy world outside. And yet, they keep the home alive. You take it all in. The women, the hearth, the wind, the walls, the smoke, the tension between survival and exhaustion. This is merely the beginning of what winter demands of them, and you're already shivering. You wake before dawn, if wake is even the right word for that thin, shivery state where your body never fully slept because the cold kept poking you like an overly enthusiastic cat. The cottage is still dark, save for the faintest grey leaking through the smoke hole overhead. It's that special medieval grey that's not really light. It's just darkness considering retirement. Inside the main room, women are already moving, wrapped in layers of wool and linen that rustle softly as they work. Their breath clouds in the air, rising alongside the ghost of last night's fire, which died hours ago. Of course it did. Fires in homes like this aren't meant to burn all night, and whoever was hoping for morning warmth clearly has unrealistic expectations of the 13th century. The hearth sits cold and sooty, a few charred embers crumbling into white ash. You watch as the first woman of the day kneels before it, stretching stiff fingers toward the spent fire, as if apologizing for waking it from its slumber. She tugs at her shawl, reaches into a basket of kindling, and begins coaxing the embers back to life. The process is slow, deliberate, and performed with a reverence that would make a modern barista weep. You can almost hear her thoughts. Come on, old friend, just one spark, please. Because nothing in this house can begin. Breakfast, warmth, chores, sanity, until the fire agrees to cooperate. You settle in, watching the room take shape. Women emerge from sleeping corners, hair braided tight to keep lice manageable, shoulders hunched from a night spent trying to curl around pockets of non-existent heat. Their faces have that early morning winter look, pale, puffy, a little offended that the world expects them to function when their toes are still negotiating circulation rights. And yet there's no time for self-pity. Medieval winter doesn't care if you're tired. Daily domestic labour begins immediately, and it begins cold. You watch a woman, perhaps the eldest daughter, carry a wooden tub toward the back of the house. It's the designated laundry zone, which, unfortunately for her, is also the coldest corner of the cottage. Why? Because it's farthest from the fire, closest to the drafty wall, and near the little storage space where icy air always creeps in as if rent-free. She doesn't complain. She just pushes her sleeves up and starts sorting linens, her breath fogging over the pile. You're about to sympathise when she reaches into a bucket and pulls out a chunk of frozen cloth. Frozen. Laundry as medieval sculpture. You can practically hear your modern washing machine sighing in smug superiority. Another woman, perhaps the mother of the household, takes her place by the hearth now that the flames have finally caught. You'd expect this to be the warmest spot in the house, and comparatively it is. But don't get excited. The warmth is stingy. It hugs the fire pit and refuses to travel more than a few inches. She sits within that tiny radius, chopping vegetables on a low stool, her back exposed to an unrelenting draft. Every time she shifts even slightly away from the flames, cold air slinks under her layers like a petty saboteur. You draw closer, curious. Someone hands her a turnip with frost still clinging to its skin. She knocks the ice off with the back of her knife in a movement so routine it almost looks elegant. This is how breakfast begins. Cold ingredients, cold tools, cold fingers. The fire just provides enough warmth to unfreeze her hands, but not enough to seep into her bones. You wonder how anyone cooks like this, and the answer reveals itself, very slowly and with extremely low expectations. Meanwhile, another woman has stepped outside into the yard. Open air, snow-laced, still dim. What's her job? Fetching water. The medieval equivalent of being volunteered for punishment. She trudges to the well, her breath puffing out in short bursts, her boots crunching through frost. You can see her shiver even from inside. The water she pulls up is so cold it feels almost metallic in the bucket. She drags it inside, water sloshing onto her skirts and instantly turning to a stiff, icy crust. She doesn't flinch. She's used to working soaked and frozen. Back in the main room, textiles are being spun, mended or rewoven. A spindle twirls in the fingers of a woman whose hands are stiff enough to snap mid-motion. She sits near the wall, where a draft slides down like a waterfall of cold. She doesn't move closer to the fire because the fire belongs to whoever is cooking or tending children. That's the unspoken rule. Warmth is distributed according to household hierarchy and immediate necessity. Spinning wool? Not urgent. Staying warm? Apparently optional. The repetitive motion, draw, twist, spin, keeps her fingers from turning numb barely. You watch her concentrate, her breath puffing out with each exhalation. She shakes her hands out every few minutes, a private rebellion against the cold. You can't blame her. If your own hands were this cold, you'd be filing a complaint with HR, assuming your HR wasn't also freezing somewhere else in the house. Another cluster of women kneels near the door, scrubbing wooden bowls from last night's meal. The water is barely above freezing. Their hands go red instantly, the skin tightening, knuckles whitening as they scrub. You want to intervene, hand them gloves, a towel, maybe a heated blanket. But of course none of those things exist. You consider suggesting mittens, but then remember that mittens plus washing dishes equals medieval chaos. So they work bare-handed, rubbing, rinsing, drying each piece while their fingers battle for feeling. You can practically hear their joints cracking in protest. And then there's the coldest job of all, sweeping. You wouldn't think sweeping was particularly icy, but watch. The woman with the broom is stuck patrolling the outer edges of the room, the dead zones where cold settles like an unwanted roommate. Every step she takes lands her in a pocket of freezing air. The draft sneaks into her sleeves. Dust clings to the moisture on her fingers. She sweeps anyway, gathering the day's debris into a neat pile before tossing it outside. A gust hits her full in the face. Her eyes water instantly. She blinks it away and keeps going. The most ironic part. Her job makes the room colder. Every time she opens the door to toss out ashes or sweepings, the outside air sweeps in like it owns the place. You slowly notice a pattern. Every essential domestic task, sweeping, washing, spinning, cooking, fetching water, happens in the coldest parts of the home. Women barely ever get to linger near the fire, and even if they did, it wouldn't be enough. The fire is just one flame trying to heat a room-sized freezer. The women, on the other hand, are expected to keep the entire household functioning at all times, no matter how low the temperature drops. You watch them adjust their shawls, blow on their fingers, rub their arms, and shake out their hands every few minutes. It's like a cold weather dance, one they perform instinctively. They adapt constantly. Standing when sitting is too cold, sitting when standing is too tiring, moving closer to the hearth only when their task justifies the privilege. A small joke slips into your mind about how modern people complain when their thermostats drop below 68 degrees, but you keep it quiet. The medieval women around you already look unimpressed enough. The day moves on. As the light grows stronger outside, the interior remains dim and bone-chilling. Sunlight doesn't warm the room, it just exposes how much smoke hangs in the air. Ash dust glimmers in the beams of light while the cold digs deeper into the walls. Tasks shift. Water suddenly needs heating, bread needs kneading, wool needs carding. Everything depends on hands, frozen hands that never stop moving. And the cruelest truth emerges. Medieval domestic work is stationary and delicate. Tasks that require stillness, spinning, sewing, preparing food, are the tasks done by women. Stillness kills warmth. Every moment they sit, crouch or kneel, the cold sets in deeper. They don't generate heat through movement the way men do outdoors. Instead, they lose heat by doing the things that keep everyone else alive. You watch a woman lean back from her spinning for a moment, flexing her fingers. She blows warm air on them and tries to laugh with another woman across the room. The moment is brief, but it's warmth of another kind. One that doesn't make the air any warmer but softens the bleakness of the day. Then she returns to her spindle. The cold returns with her. The wind outside rises just enough to make the walls groan. A low complaining sound as the wattle and daub shift under the pressure. You glance toward them, half expecting to see the cold itself squeezing through. In a way it is. Medieval homes, especially those of ordinary families, aren't built to keep warmth in. They're built to exist, to stand upright, to not collapse under the weight of a heavy roof. Comfort, thermal insulation, that's adorable, not part of the package. You step closer to one wall, the one opposite the hearth. It's a patchwork of timber posts crisscrossed like a skeleton, with daub filling the gaps. Mud, straw, dung, sand. A delightful cocktail of whatever organic material the family could find. You lean close and feel an unmistakable cold breath seeping through the seams. In some places the daub has cracked, revealing thin fissures where daylight leaks in, and with it the winter air that has all the manners of an uninvited party guest who drinks your ale and won't leave. That cold drift hits your face sharply, surprising you by how immediate it feels. You expect cold outside. You don't expect a wall to behave like a perforated colander. A woman brushing wool near that same wall doesn't even flinch. She's grown up with these drafts, learned to work around them, learned which corner freezes first and which spot becomes dangerously slick with frost. She knows that when the wind shifts direction, the entire house's interior temperature drops instantly. You can sense she's bracing for another wave of cold, and then it happens. One loud gust rattles the roof. A puff of dusty thatch falls from above, drifting lazily downward as if unsure whether it wants to land. That's when it hits you, literally. A small clump drops onto your cloak, scattering into your hair. Medieval insulation from above, dry grasses, reeds, sometimes heather. Beautiful when viewed from afar, less beautiful when it's falling into your soup. The roof is low, slanting, its underside lined with beams blackened from years of smoke. Above that, the thatch is packed thick, good enough to keep out rain and snow, but absolutely useless at trapping heat. Warm air rises, climbs into the thatch, and disappears like a bank account in December. You can stand up, stretch your hand toward the rafters, and feel the warmth evaporating. That upward draft carries smoke, soot, and what little comfort the hearth offers. You catch sight of another problem, the smoke hole near the roof's peak, a crude opening meant to act like a chimney. Except it doesn't. Smoke billows toward it in sluggish plumes, but the slightest change in wind direction pushes it back into the room. You breathe it in, your throat scratching, your eyes watering. The women don't seem to mind, or rather, they don't act like they mind. They blink when it stings. They cough occasionally. They wipe tears from the corner of their eyes without breaking rhythm in their work. Smoke-filled air is just part of daily life, an atmospheric seasoning. A woman nearby stirs a pot over the fire. Her face is half in shadow, half illuminated by the orange glow, revealing the soot staining her forehead and cheeks. She wipes her brow with the back of her hand and only succeeds in smudging the soot more. She coughs lightly and continues stirring. You wonder how much smoke she inhales every day. Minutes? Hours? The medieval standard is apparently enough to coat your lungs and redecorate your sinuses. You move away from the hearth and instantly regret it. The cold greets you like an overeager relative, arms outstretched, ready to squeeze. The temperature difference is shocking. By the fire it felt icy. Here it feels glacial. The walls almost vibrate with the force of the wind pushing against them. You can actually hear it humming through the cracks, a thin whistle like a medieval flute played badly. You try not to laugh, but it slips out. One of the women glances your way and smiles tiredly, as if she's heard these haunted house noises her whole life. A pot of ale sits near the wall, waiting to warm slightly before being poured. You place your hand on the outside and feel nothing. No warmth, no chill. Just the temperature of the surrounding air, which, depressingly, seems indistinguishable from the icy yard outside. The walls have no insulation, no barrier, no sense of responsibility. Then you notice the floor, hard-packed earth, but colder than stone. The cold rises from it in little invisible waves, curling around your ankles like frost kittens clinging to your legs. Women working here have tied scraps of wool around their calves to keep the drafts from slipping up their skirts. It's a charming medieval hack that barely works. They know it. You know it. The cold knows it. Everyone plays their part. You crouch and touch the floor. Even through your glove, the chill bites. A woman sweeping nearby gives you a look as if to say, "Yes, it's been cold since 900 AD. Good observation." You nod politely. A sudden clatter interrupts your thoughts. A shutter on the far wall has blown open, slamming against its frame. Wind surges in with a blade-edged gust that sweeps across the entire room. Women jump into motion instantly. One rushes forward to grab the shutter, pressing it closed with her full weight, her hair whipping behind her. Another braces her from behind, and together they secure the wooden bar that's supposed to hold the shutter in place. You see their fingers shaking as they push the latch down. The moment the shutter is fixed, the entire room exhales at once. That gust has left its mark. Candles flicker violently, and the fire has shrunk to a sulky little flame. One woman rises and feeds it a handful of precious kindling, muttering under her breath about winter having no manners. You can't blame her. A storm outside is a storm inside. You walk toward the back of the house, where the cold feels even more aggressive. Here the wall hasn't been repaired in some time. The daub has crumbled, leaving gaps large enough to poke a finger through. Larger gaps are stuffed with straw, cloth scraps, or, in one case, what looks like a child's abandoned sock. Medieval insulation on a budget. The wind. Test every weakness, every crack, every loose timber, eager to claim a little more of the indoors. A woman sorting vegetables in this back corner has her shawl pulled so far over her head she resembles a walking root bundle. She shifts occasionally, trying to position herself in a way that blocks the draft. There is no way. The draft wins every time. You touch one of the interior timbers, expecting at least a hint of warmth. It's freezing. Solid wood, soaked with moisture from years of winter storms, radiates cold like a passive-aggressive co-worker. In the morning, ice sometimes forms on the inside surface. Not always enough to scrape off, but enough to sparkle. The house breathes differently in winter. It tightens, stiffens, creaks. You hear an especially loud crack overhead, and someone murmurs that the roof beams are shrinking from the cold. They do. Wood contracts, creating new gaps between the beams and the walls. Each tiny shift invites another needle of wind. You return to the hearth, which now feels like a desperate sanctuary. A woman gestures to a stool, invites you to sit closer. You do, and feel the faint warmth, like a small mercy. You realise how strategic the women must be, where to sit, how to angle their bodies, how to store heat in layers of wool, how to keep their feet from stiffening. The home is not a shelter from winter. It is another place to battle it. The fire snaps, sending up a spark that dances briefly before fading into nothing. The warmth brushes your knees but refuses to reach your shoulders. You hunch forward instinctively, chasing the heat like a cat determined to absorb every available sunbeam. One woman watches you and laughs softly. It's the kind of laugh that says, "Yes, we do this every winter, every day, every hour." The absurdity becomes clear. Medieval homes were not shelters in winter. They were sieves. Every surface leaked cold. Every corner trapped drafts. Every task had to be adapted to the environment. Women didn't just work inside the home, they fought against the home too. Their daily routines were fully entwined with the structural flaws surrounding them. Yet somehow life continues. A pot boils, a child giggles, a spindle whirs, the roof complains, the walls whisper, and through it all, women move with the quiet endurance of people who know the house may not keep them warm, but they must keep everyone warm enough to survive. Before dawn fully decides whether it's arriving or calling in sick, the first footsteps crunch through the snow outside. A man, likely the head of the household, pushes open the door, bringing with him a gust of air so sharp it knifes through the room. The women nearest the entrance brace instinctively, pulling shawls tighter around their shoulders as the wind curls around ankles, skirts, sleeves. The man carries a few pieces of firewood under his arm. Nothing dramatic, nothing close to plentiful. Just a small bundle, carefully chosen and rationed from a pile that is nowhere near large enough to last the entire winter. You watch the women's eyes track that wood like hungry cats staring down a dried-up bowl. Not because they want it for themselves, though they do, desperately, but because that stack represents the difference between soup and ice, between comfort and frostbite, between a home that functions and a home that falls apart. Firewood isn't just fuel, it's power, it's currency, it's survival. He sets the wood by the hearth without ceremony. The mother reaches for one piece immediately, testing its weight, checking whether it's dry enough to burn. Wet wood is basically medieval comedy. It smokes, it sputters, it hisses, and then it dies dramatically. Today she's lucky. This one is dry. She sets it beside the flame, coaxing the fire back to life, while the man brushes snow off his cloak and prepares to go out again. In this world, the firewood supply is governed by a brutal equation: how much wood can be gathered or purchased before winter hits, and how much of it can be spared each day without starving spring of its fuel. You cannot burn generously, ever. You cannot burn frivolously. You cannot burn for comfort. Winter demands discipline, and discipline means women live at the mercy of whatever heat remains after everyone else has taken their share. The cold doesn't distribute itself evenly, and neither does the warmth. You hear the man talking quietly to another member of the household. The wood gathered yesterday was too little. There might be no more today. The forest paths are frozen, the streams are treacherous, and even the more privileged homes in the village are rationing tightly. Firewood scarcity isn't just a burden, it's an annual anxiety. Women, meanwhile, extend the life of every ember. They are the true guardians of heat. They stretch fires the way modern people stretch a paycheck. Carefully, creatively, sometimes absurdly. You see one add not a log, but a handful of tiny twigs, barely more than kindling, and somehow turn it into a flame steady enough to warm the pot of grain simmering for breakfast. It's not magic, it's centuries of practice. Still, even the most skilled woman cannot conjure fire from nothing, and winter is long. As the man leaves again, another day of gathering, bartering, or simply searching for something burnable, the women begin their quiet ritual of heat triage. Who needs to be warmest? The eldest gets the spot nearest the hearth. The toddler gets the second best corner, where drafts are fewer. A baby is wrapped in 2 layers of wool and placed against the mother's chest. A young girl positions herself beside a sibling who radiates a tiny degree of warmth. The women themselves stay back just enough to let everyone else have priority. You inch closer, wondering who keeps track of the rationing. It becomes clear soon enough. Everyone does. Firewood is counted like coins. Every log used today subtracts days of survival from March, and medieval March is basically winter wearing a cheap disguise. One woman dips a ladle into the pot hanging over the fire. The heat is so faint she barely flinches. This is breakfast for a household of 8. One pot, not nearly enough fire. She steels her shoulders, blows on her fingers, and begins distributing wooden bowls that steam only because the cold is so intense the vapour flees instantly. While the family eats, you hear something outside, an axe hitting wood, then again and again. The rhythmic chop echoes through the walls like a slow heartbeat. You step toward the door and peer through the gap. It's a teenage boy, hacking at a log so frozen it might as well be stone. Every strike sends frost flying into the air. It takes him 5, 6, 7 swings just to split a small piece. He wipes his nose with the back of his mitten, adjusts his grip, and strikes again. He is the lucky one. He gets to move, to build heat with each blow, to sweat beneath his tunic. Inside, women watch firewood being chopped and feel colder, knowing they can only access that warmth indirectly, through the small, insufficient pieces that make it to the hearth. You feel the inequality like another draft. Even when firewood exists, it doesn't circulate through the household evenly. Men return from the outdoors, often soaked, often stiff, and move directly to the hearth. They peel off wet garments, hang them by the fire, and warm their fingers until they can hold tools again. This isn't selfishness, it's necessity. If men cannot perform outdoor labour, the household collapses. But that necessity creates a hierarchy. The fire becomes a male-dominated resource, and women adapt around that fact. They lean in, warm their hands for a few seconds, then retreat before they are fully thawed, making space for whoever needs it more. The little ones need the fire, the elders need the fire, the men need the fire. Even the animals at times get closer than the women who cook, clean, wash and mend. By midday, the cottage reaches its warmest point, still so cold you can see your breath, but warm enough that the freezing sensation in your fingers becomes merely uncomfortable instead of alarming. Women take advantage of this lukewarm miracle to stretch out chores that require sitting still. If they delay, they'll do them in the late afternoon chill when the sun sinks so early it feels personal. A woman kneels to grind grains with a stone quern. The movement is steady, circular, deliberate. You can see her shoulders tense each time she leans forward. The draft behind her slips through her layers. Every few minutes she pauses to blow warm air onto her hands. Not too long, though. Grain doesn't grind itself and firewood doesn't grow in the pantry. Another measures the wood stack, it's already shrinking. She eyes it like a mother watching her children grow too quickly. Equal parts. Pride and dread. Every piece burned today is one fewer for tomorrow. She repositions the logs, wipes dust off them, counts them silently. There's a mental ledger she updates constantly, one that determines everything from meal timing to when they dare boil water. And then there's the uncomfortable truth. Firewood belongs not only to the household, but to the Lord indirectly. Peasants are often limited by law regarding where they can gather wood. Fallen branches? Acceptable. Cutting down trees? Illegal. Using deadwood too close to the Lord's forest boundary? Risky. So scarcity is not just nature's doing, it's man-made too, and women pay the price in numb fingers and smoke-stung eyes. As the sun dips behind the clouds, the indoor temperature slips again. The fire crackles weakly, and you sense the day's ration has nearly been spent. Women know this moment like a recurring nightmare. They gather around, strategizing silently with glances and gestures. A woman offers a small piece of wood from her personal stash, wood she collected during summer. A luxury, a sacrifice. She sets it beside the hearth, and the others look at her with gratitude. They won't burn it yet. Precious wood is like emergency medicine, only used when someone is ill or when the cold becomes dangerous. Evening approaches fast. The room dims. The draughts grow sharper. A pot of stew is reheated, but the fire is weak, the wood nearly gone. Women eat quickly because warmth evaporates from the food before it even reaches their mouths. And then they prepare for the coldest part of the day, the night. They bank the fire, they tuck embers under ash like a parent tucking in a child. They place a few small sticks nearby, ready for dawn. They check the shutter latches, stuff rags into wall cracks, wrap shawls around their bodies. The men settle in the warmest spots. Children next. Elders in the safest corner. And the women? They fill the spaces left behind, curled near walls that leak like sieves, near floors that drink in the cold, near windows that shake when the wind growls. Firewood scarcity shapes everything. The hierarchy shapes everything else. And as you watch the women settle in, their faces already tightening with the chill of night, you understand something profound. Medieval winter didn't simply happen outside. It happened inside too, every day, in every household, and women were the ones who endured the cold longest and hardest, because they were the ones who made sure everyone else survived it. You wake to the sound of fabric rustling, layers upon layers of wool, linen, and whatever scraps of cloth can be persuaded into service. Morning in a medieval winter doesn't begin with warmth. It begins with inventory. Every woman in the house conducts a silent assessment of her clothing, checking the few defences she has against the cold. How many layers? Which layers are dry? Which ones have stiffened with frost? Which pieces can be spared for children, and which must be patched before the fabric literally dissolves in the cold. You watch as shawls are shaken out like thin, tired flags preparing for another day of battle. Medieval clothing looks heavy from a distance, but up close, you see the truth. It's not nearly as insulating as your brain wants to believe. Wool is warm, yes, but common wool isn't the fluffy, soft, artisanal, hand-spun by woodland elves quality you might imagine. It's coarse, scratchy, often thin in places from years of wear, and after months of winter moisture it loses loft and becomes more like a damp cardigan that forgot its purpose. Women start layering long before the hearth wakes up. A linen shift goes on first, the base layer that never leaves their skin and collects every ounce of sweat, smoke and soot the day has to offer. Over that goes a wool kirtle, thick but not thick enough. The hem slightly stiff where yesterday's snow melted and refroze. Then an apron, maybe two, then a shawl, another shawl, a cloak if they're lucky. You see one woman tie an extra length of wool around her neck like a scarf, though it looks more like an oversized sock someone repurposed in desperation. You note how every piece of fabric has a job. There is no fashion, only function. Even the colours, faded browns, smoky greys, washed out blues, tell a story of practicality. Dye isn't cheap, and layers lose beauty under constant winter wear. The garments are patched, repatched, darned, reinforced, and sometimes entirely rebuilt from older clothing. Medieval women aren't just wearing clothes, they're wearing the physical records of years of survival. You watch a young girl tug on her mitts that don't actually have fingers, just two woolen lumps tied at the wrist with unravelling string. She wiggles her hands inside them like she's trying to operate puppets. They won't help much. Wool mitts get wet and freeze quickly, but they are better than bare fingers. Bare fingers crack, split, bleed, and then become useless for spinning or mending. And if a woman can't use her hands, she becomes a burden in a world where burdens rarely survive winter. Another woman adjusts her hose, thin wool stockings that cover from ankle to thigh. They look warm until you realise they're held up by nothing but a garter and stubbornness. You see the fabric sag, exposing a strip of skin between hose and shift. She fixes it quickly. Even a few inches of exposed flesh can chill the body for hours. Her shoes offer even less help. Simple leather, worn thin at the soles, flexible like slippers but nowhere near as cosy. Snow seeps into the seams. Mud freezes along the edges. Straw is stuffed inside for insulation, but it shifts annoyingly when she moves. You watch her step and hear the faint crunch crinkle of the straw rearranging itself, like her feet are walking around with tiny broken instruments inside them. The cold creeps in regardless. As the fire is coaxed awake, again, slowly, with a level of patience you could nominate for sainthood, you see women rearranging layers not to get warm, but to lose warmth as slowly as possible. Two very different goals. Warmth is fleeting. Slowing heat loss is tactical. One woman demonstrates the medieval art of tactical layering perfectly. She takes a woolen bodice, worn so long it has moulded to her shape, and fastens it over her kirtle. Then she tucks her shawl into it, creating a seal around her torso that traps warm air for a little longer. It's like building a personal greenhouse out of clothing, except the greenhouse leaks constantly, and the weather outside is a vindictive force with a personal vendetta. You watch another woman wrap cloth around her calves, an extra barrier against drafts that shoot straight up the skirts like mischievous gremlins. She circles the fabric twice, ties it off, then tests the coverage by lifting her skirt slightly to let a small gust from the doorframe hit her leg. She nods, satisfied. Not warm, but less exposed. There's a difference. You actually catch a moment of levity when two young women help each other get dressed, one trying to fasten the ties of her friend's cloak while the other keeps blowing on her numb fingers, making the task look like a slow-motion attempt at knot tying inside a walk-in freezer. One of them laughs, the sound brittle but real, and quips about how the cold might as well move in permanently. The other replies that winter already has her room, and she's probably behind on rent. You grin despite the cold, but jokes aside, clothing is a daily struggle, and here's the brutal truth. The amount of warmth medieval clothing provides is directly tied to wealth, And most women you're observing are not wealthy, not even close. The richest women in town, merchant wives, minor nobility, those with status, have multiple kirtles, lined cloaks, fur-trimmed hoods, embroidered gloves. You've seen them at market before, walking with an air of warmth others can only dream of. Their clothes are heavy, luxurious, and layered enough to fend off the worst winds. These women, they have what their hands can make and their husbands can afford. Fur trim is a fantasy. Lined garments are rare. Thick wool is expensive. Embroidery is decorative and therefore impractical. Every layer they put on is a compromise between raw necessity and scarce resources. You watch a woman hold a sleeve up to the light. The fabric is so thin she can see the brightness through it. She sighs, shakes her head, and folds it anyway. She'll use it as a middle layer, one more barrier against the cold, but not one she can rely on. Even the children's clothing tells a story of scarcity. A toddler is wrapped in a woolen gown that once belonged to an older sibling. The sleeves are too long, the hem drags, and the stitches are visible where someone did their best to resize it. But the fabric is warmish. It will do. Women pinch the child's cheeks gently to bring some colour into them, but the cold drains it away again within seconds. Clothing repair is endless. And today, as the room slowly brightens, one woman settles near the hearth. Not too close, or she'll monopolise the warmth, and brings out her mending basket. Needles glint faintly as she threads them. Her fingers tremble slightly from the cold. She rubs them together, then starts sewing. You watch her work and realise she's trying to patch a hole in a shawl worn so thin it resembles a medieval mosquito net. The hole is small, but the surrounding fabric is delicate. She stitches carefully, as though trying not to break a cobweb. The cold doesn't help. Numb fingers don't handle fine tasks well. She fumbles once, twice, but eventually succeeds. The result is uneven, but functional. And in this world, functional is enough. Outside, the wind rises, and the draft strengthens. You watch the shawl she just repaired flutter slightly as the cold sneaks in. She pulls it closer around her body, not trusting the patch entirely, and ties it in place. Her chin rests against the wool. Her face is partially hidden from the icy air. But even with all these layers, shifts, kirtles, aprons, shawls, hoods, mitts, women remain cold. Constantly. Deeply. Chronically. Layers help, but not enough. Not when the house is freezing, the air is always moving, and the work requires stillness. Stillness is the enemy. Men outside keep warm by moving, walking, hauling wood, chopping, tending animals, negotiating, travelling. Their bodies generate heat through constant motion. Women inside lose heat doing tasks that demand precision. Hands must stay still for spinning. Arms must stay controlled for stirring. Bodies must bend over embroidery, kneading, sorting, sewing. Every job requires poised, concentrated energy, not big, warming movements. You realise clothing isn't failing them. The lifestyle is. No matter how many layers they add, the cold finds its way in. Under hems, through sleeves, around shawls, beneath cloaks, through shoes, between the threads. Like a clever villain who knows all the secret entrances in the house. Every woman you see is wrapped like a human onion, and somehow, every woman is still shivering. You feel it too. Even with all your layers, the cold penetrates. It settles somewhere deep, a place wool can't reach, and you understand. This isn't a problem of a drafty house or subpar garments. This is a problem of existence. Winter is everywhere, unavoidable, intimate. But women face it the most, and their clothing, valiant as it tries to be, can only do so much. Still, they button, they tie, they wrap, they tuck, they adjust, they endure, layer by layer, stitch by stitch, morning after morning, frost after frost. Because in medieval winter, clothing isn't comfort, it's survival. Night in a medieval winter is not an event, it is a force, a presence, a slow, creeping certainty that settles into every corner of the house long before the sun disappears behind the horizon. By the time dusk reaches the village, the cold has already begun its quiet takeover. You feel it in the air, a shift, a tightening, a hush, and the women around you sense it even more deeply. They begin their nightly preparations with the kind of weary efficiency that comes only from repetition taught by survival. You watch the hearth sputter weakly. The day's firewood ration has already been exhausted hours ago. What's left now is a glowing bed of embers, tucked under a pile of ash like sleeping coals under a blanket. This is intentional. This is banking the fire, one of the most essential techniques in winter. If the embers can survive until morning, the first woman awake will coax them back into flame with a few precious twigs. If they die, the house starts from scratch in near-freezing temperatures, and morning becomes a small but palpable disaster. But the embers provide almost no warmth. They're more symbolic than functional. You crouch near them, hoping for even a whisper of heat, but the air above the hearth is so chilled that smoke shivers as it rises. The women begin laying out what passes for bedding. In wealthier homes, beds have wool mattresses, curtains, maybe even fur-lined blankets. But here, most of the household sleeps on straw mattresses, basically sacks filled with whatever dry plant matter was available in late autumn. Straw, reeds, leftover flax stems. The mattresses flatten quickly, growing lumpy and uneven. As they compress, they lose insulation, letting the cold creep straight through from the earth-packed floor beneath. One woman kneels and fluffs the straw with her hands. It's not much of a fluff, more of a desperate rearranging, but she does it with care, trying to shake loose clumps and redistribute warmth evenly. A few dried stalks poke out, and she tucks them back in with quick, practiced motions. Every woman here has been stabbed by straw more times than she can count. You notice something unsettling. The mattress feels cold to the touch. Not just cool, cold. It absorbed the chill all day. When she spreads a wool blanket over it, the blanket doesn't warm the mattress cools the blanket. She sighs softly. Another woman is beating out a different straw mattress with a wooden paddle. This is partly to fluff it, partly to break up hardened lumps, and partly, unavoidably, to scare out pests. Because the truth is unavoidable, straw mattresses are basically Airbnb for lice, fleas, beetles, spiders, and a rotating assortment of creatures who enjoy free rent. The daily beating reduces, but never eliminates the problem. You watch the straw shift and scatter, tiny clouds of dust floating up. The woman coughs once, then keeps working. Winter is pest season too, and women deal with that after a full day already, spent in cold. Once the bedding is prepared, the women begin arranging sleeping places. Medieval homes did not have bedrooms the way you imagine. A single sleeping space holds nearly everyone. Privacy is a luxury, but warmth is more important. The sleeping arrangement becomes a negotiation, not in words, but in necessity. Children go closest to the hearth, not because the fire is warm, but because the draft is weakest near that wall. Elders get the next warmest spots. Their joints ache constantly. Nights are often agony. Men sleep near the fire too, especially if they'll be working outdoors early. Drying their clothing overnight is vital. Women sleep wherever the remaining space exists, usually the coldest areas near the walls, under windows, or beside doorways. You notice how the older women automatically settle into the harsher spots, leaving slightly warmer ones for younger mothers and infants. There is a quiet heroism here, so normalised that nobody acknowledges it. Your eyes drift to the corner where the cold concentrates like a lurking animal. One woman spreads out her cloak on the straw, sits down, and arranges her shawl over her legs. She shivers once, adjusts her layers, and tries to settle in. You want to step in and move her somewhere warmer, but here, warmth is a resource shared according to need, not sentiment. And she has learned, year after year, that her needs come last. As more people settle down, the single room darkens further. A tallow candle flickers on a beam, throwing a yellowish light across the straw-strewn floor. Its flame wavers with every draught. You feel the gusts before you see them, cold fingers brushing your neck, sliding down your spine, curling around your feet like icy vines. The candlelight trembles so much it feels more like a signal of distress than the illumination. One woman stands and moves toward the shutter to check the latch. Her breath fogs the air. She runs her fingers along the edges, stuffing a bit of wool into a gap where the wind whistles through. It muffles the sound but doesn't stop the cold. And then comes the ritual of bedding down. You watch as a toddler is tucked between two siblings like a tiny burrito of hope. Their combined body heat forms a little bubble of survivable warmth. It won't last long, but it helps. A baby is wrapped so tightly in layered wool that only its nose peeks out, and even that looks offended by the temperature. Mothers pull children close, though doing so exposes their own backs to the cold air flowing down from the roof beams. You settle onto a straw mattress yourself, not too close to the wall, because the cold radiating from it feels like an invisible sheet of ice, but within reach of the faint warmth generated by the cluster of bodies nearby. It helps, but only a little. Night deepens, the cold grows heavier. Your breath fogs in slow clouds as the room plunges toward freezing. You hear small movements in the dark, women shifting, blankets rustling, teeth chattering softly in an attempt to muffle the sound. No one wants to wake children, because that means stepping out of precious body heat to soothe them. One woman cracks her knuckles inside her shawl trying to warm stiff joints. Another clears her throat, but quickly so the sound won't carry. The fire embers glow faintly across the room, red as sleepy eyes. The smell of smoke lingers in the air, thick and almost sweet. It clings to your hair, your clothes, your whole existence. You shiver. A draft slithers in from beneath the doorframe. You pull your cloak tighter. It helps for 5 seconds. Then the cold cuts through everything again. This is medieval winter's defining skill. Persistence. It never leaves. It only shifts location. You hear a baby fuss from across the room. A woman rises, slowly, carefully, her movements stiff from cold. She picks up the child and begins rocking it gently. Her shawl falls slightly, exposing the back of her neck to the icy air. She winces but says nothing. She walks back and forth across the uneven floor, stepping around bodies, avoiding the deepest drafts. She tries to hush the baby, her breath forming pale clouds around its swaddled head. You watch her pace, hear the faint shuffling of her feet, see her shoulders shiver as the cold presses its advantage. When the baby finally settles, she returns to her place, one of the coldest corners, and curls tightly into herself to conserve whatever warmth remains. Another woman wakes coughing, a deep, rattling sound, the kind born of cold and smoke and months of breathing icy air. She tries to stifle it, but it shakes through her body. She pulls her cloak over her mouth and breathes slowly, trying not to wake the children beside her. You see the exhaustion in her eyes even from across the room. You understand suddenly that night is not a time of rest. It is another set of hours to endure. You feel movement near your foot. A rat, maybe, or a mouse, scurrying in search of crumbs or warmth. The woman beside you flicks her hand at it instinctively, then pulls her blanket closer. This too is normal. The wind rises, the walls creak, the roof groans. A bit of frost drifts down like glittering dust. Someone mutters a quick prayer. You shift, and the cold shifts with you. The air grows sharper as midnight passes. This is the worst hour of winter nights, the moment when temperatures drop low enough that dew on the thatch freezes solid, when bodies lose heat faster than they can replenish it, when even breath feels heavy. You hear another small cough, a groan, a whispered lullaby in the dark. Women remain awake more than you expect, tending children, adjusting bedding, checking embers, massaging aching hands, sharing warmth where possible. Their sleep comes in fragments, stolen between responsibilities. And as you lie there, feeling every muscle tighten against the cold, you realize the cruelest truth. Women sleep in the same freezing rooms they work in. There is no reprieve, no warm bedroom waiting, no heated bed, no softness, just straw, blankets, drafts, and the endless winter pressing in. The night stretches long, hours pass slowly. The darkness seems solid, almost heavy enough to touch, and the cold never stops reminding you it is in charge. You curl tighter. You try to breathe warmth into your hands. You close your eyes, hoping for sleep, and when you finally drift off, you understand something you didn't before. Women in medieval winter didn't just freeze during the day, they froze at night too. All night. Every night. Without fail. And they did it quietly, so everyone else in the house could sleep. Morning arrives not with sunlight. There is hardly any, but with sound. A whimper, a rustle, a small sharp cry that slices through the thin veil of sleep. You open your eyes to a familiar scene in a medieval winter household. A woman already awake, already shivering, already huddled over a fussy infant whose face is blotchy with cold and hunger. The mother rocks the child gently, her breath misting in the air as she hums a soft tune that barely rises above a whisper. The temperature inside the cottage is still close to freezing. No one should be awake in this level of cold. Yet the day begins with children long before the fire does. Infant care in medieval winter is practically a sport of endurance, where mothers, and occasionally older daughters, battle cold with nothing more than their own body heat and layers of wool that refuse to do their job properly. You watch the woman shift her shawl to expose her shoulder, the act necessary but dangerous. The instant her skin meets the air, you feel the shock ripple through her body. The cold takes no prisoners. It clamps onto her like a biting animal. Still, she lifts the child closer, offering warmth from the most reliable heater in the house, her own body. You can almost hear the child's small internal sigh of relief as it nuzzles closer, but the mother's relief is shorter-lived. Feeding an infant means holding still for long stretches, and stillness invites cold the way darkness invites shadows. She tightens her jaw, forcing down the shiver that threatens to shake them both. Her fingers are stiff with the morning chill. She rubs one hand briskly along her arm, then switches the baby to the other side. It's a delicate dance, soothing without freezing, feeding without shaking, staying awake without moving too much. Behind her, a toddler stirs and whimpers for attention. Another woman, older, maybe a sister, maybe a cousin, crawls across the straw and gathers the child into her lap. She tucks him under her cloak, rubbing his back with the steady rhythm of someone who has done this 1,000 times. Her hands, red and chapped, move with gentle certainty despite the cold. The toddler's feet peek out briefly, small and pale before she wraps them inside her shawl. You notice how the mother's shoulders hitch as another wave of cold settles over her. She pulls the baby in tighter, creating what warmth she can. The child clings, tiny hands gripping her tunic with instinctual desperation. This is winter childcare, a constant battle to keep small bodies from losing too much heat. And because babies cannot regulate their temperature well, mothers must serve as both coat and heater, even at the expense of their own comfort. Another woman rises from her bedding, slowly, painfully. Her joints are stiff, her fingers curled inward as if trying to defend themselves from the cold that seeped into them all night. She moves toward the hearth and kneels, coaxing yesterday's embers into life. The faint crackle is a small blessing. You watch as she adds twigs, breathes life into the flame, shields it from drafts with her hands, and gradually miraculously coaxes a fire into being. Her reward? A few inches of warmth. The rest of the room remains as cold as ever. By now, multiple children are awake, and hungry, and cold. A dangerous combination. The women coordinate silently, a choreography born of years of necessity. One tends the baby. One warms water for porridge, impatiently waiting for the fire to cooperate. One tries to calm two squabbling siblings. Another attempts to rewrap a toddler whose blanket has slipped during the night. The toddlers, of course, hate being constrained. They wriggle, they kick, they attempt escape. One manages to crawl halfway toward the door before being scooped up like a runaway snowball. You watch a young girl of about 8 hold a swaddled infant with a seriousness well beyond her age. She adjusts the blanket carefully, checks the baby's nose for coldness, and places a finger under its foot. This is not a game for her. It's responsibility. She has probably been caring for siblings since she was strong enough to hold one. Childhood here is brief, especially in winter. The porridge pot begins to steam, sending ribbons of warmth into the air, warmth so faint it barely registers. But a toddler reaches toward it anyway, drawn by the promise of heat, or maybe just the promise of food. A woman gently pulls him back and hands him a wooden cup filled with warm water instead. He sips it with exaggerated seriousness, concentrating hard not to spill. Warm water is better than no warmth at all. The baby fusses again. This time it's a high-pitched cry that cuts sharply through the room. His mother sighs, tired, so tired, and tries to shift her position. She can't get comfortable. Her back is cold. Her feet are numb. Her voice cracks slightly as she whispers soothing sounds. She pulls the shawl tighter around herself, curling forward to make a small cave of warmth for the child. The cold, persistent and cruel, steals through the fabric like it owns the place. A little later, a small crisis erupts. A child has soiled their linen undergarment, and the mess must be cleaned. In winter, this is an ordeal. The woman assigned to the task fills a shallow bowl with water. The water is not warm, it is barely liquid. She dips a cloth into it, and her entire body flinches. You can almost feel her skin protesting, but she keeps going, cleaning the child with quick, efficient strokes, then wrapping the little one in a fresh layer of wool. Her own hands turn red and raw, but the child ends up dry and warmish, which is the best outcome possible. Just behind her, an older girl rinses cloths in another bowl. The water is colder now. She grits her teeth, plunges her hands in, and scrubs quickly. A few droplets fall onto her skirt and freeze into tiny crystals. She wipes them off before they melt and makes everything worse. Throughout the morning, women constantly reposition themselves around children, not for their own comfort, but to protect tiny bodies from the coldest drafts. The seating chart of the cottage changes minute by minute as women act like human windbreakers. You see one adjust her skirt so that a child can sit on the warm part near her thigh. Another places her arm between a child and the wall to stop cold air from hitting the child's neck. Another rearranges cloaks to make a shared nest. Children are the priority in a world where infant mortality spikes every winter. Women know the signs of cold danger. They watch for blue lips, sluggish limbs, fading cries. They watch constantly, because winter never forgives inattention. You see a woman lift a child's hands and blow warm air into them repeatedly. She rubs the child's fingers, checking for stiffness. She presses her cheek to the child's forehead. She listens to the breathing. Only when satisfied does she let the child return to playing with a small wooden toy. There is no moment of peace. Every task, feeding, soothing, washing, warming, rocking, is done in a cold that penetrates skin, muscle, bone. Women do all of it while freezing. There is no heated nursery, no soft rocking chair, no clean warm cloth waiting in a basket. Everything is cold. The air is cold. The floor is cold. The bedding is cold. The water is freezing. The clothing is damp or stiff. And the work never stops. A woman rocking a baby must also watch the pot. Another woman bouncing a toddler must also mend a tear in a child's tunic. A girl carrying a swaddled infant must also fetch sticks for the hearth. It's multitasking at a level of difficulty that modern life has forgotten. Later in the morning, an older woman, maybe a grandmother, takes over with the infant. She tucks the baby inside her cloak, pressing its face to her chest for warmth. Her breath makes small clouds as she hums an old lullaby. You watch her gently rock, gently sway, gently pat the child's back. Her hands tremble not from age but from cold. Her knuckles are red and swollen. The cold exaggerates every ache. Yet she smiles slightly when the baby settles. Caring for children is exhausting. Caring for children in a medieval winter is heroic. And it falls almost entirely on women who freeze through the process. By midday, the room is a swirl of movement. Children tumbling, women working, drafts drifting, fire sputtering. You hear laughter briefly. a child being tickled in an attempt to warm them. The laugh is high and bright, a tiny spark in the gloom. But it fades quickly as the cold reasserts itself. A child sneezes. Another coughs. A mother touches a small forehead, checking for fever. Illness in winter is a dangerous companion, and women stay hyper-alert to every symptom. They brew herbal infusions when they can, mint, thyme, chamomile. They wrap children in wool. They make them sip warm broth. They watch. They worry. They hope. The afternoon passes in cycles of care, warmth management, and constant vigilance. Each time a child cries, a woman responds. Each time a draft hits, a woman shifts to block it. Each time a child's hands turn too cold, someone takes them inside their own hands and warms them back to pink. You see why medieval sources describe winter as the season of women's quiet suffering. They freeze at night, freeze at dawn, freeze during chores, and freeze while caring for children who cannot survive without constant warmth. Yet despite everything, despite the numb fingers, the aching backs, the stinging joints, the sleepless nights, they keep these children alive. And you realize something profound. Children survive medieval winters because women don't rest. Women survive medieval winters because they refuse to let children freeze. And in a world frozen to its core, the only warmth strong enough to fight back is theirs. The moment someone mentions washing, every woman within earshot exhales the same resigned sigh, the universal medieval expression for "this is going to be terrible, and we all know it." Water chores are unforgiving in summer, but in winter they are downright cruel. You feel it the moment you follow two women toward the back of the cottage, where the water buckets sit in a quiet circle like a jury waiting to judge someone. A thin crust of ice glimmers across the top of each bucket, catching what faint daylight trickles through the shutters. Even without touching it, you know the water is so cold it could make your teeth ache just by looking at it. A woman taps the surface with a wooden spoon. The ice cracks. A spider web of fractures spreads outward, and she breaks through with a quick, decisive jab. The family needs water for washing dishes, for cooking, for wiping children, for scrubbing floors, for brewing ale. None of these tasks can wait for a thaw that might not come until April. Another woman, younger and clearly less enthusiastic, plunges her hand into the water and immediately jerks it back out with a sharp inhale. The cold clings to her skin like a bite. She presses her lips together, shakes out her fingers and tries again, this time committing herself fully to the misery. She draws up a dipper of water and pours it into a shallow wooden trough used for washing dishes. The water steams slightly, steam not from heat, but from the faint temperature difference between freezing water and the barely warmer air of the cottage. You inch closer and feel the chill radiating from the trough. It's shocking. It's the kind of cold that numbs your bones before it even touches them. One of the older women begins washing the bowls from the morning meal. Her movements are brisk, almost frantic. Not because she's in a hurry, but because she's fighting against her fingers stiffening into immobility. She scrubs with a piece of rough cloth, dipping and wringing, dipping and wringing. Every time she squeezes water out of the cloth, droplets fall across her wrists and freeze instantly into a thin, brittle glaze. She wipes them off with the back of her hand and continues. The repetitive rhythm of her work is punctuated by small sounds, the soft scrape of wood, the splash of water, the hiss of breath sucked through teeth when nerves protest. You watch her shake her hands every few minutes, trying to force warmth into them. Her knuckles are swollen and cracked. Several fingertips are reddened to the point of almost purple. Chilblains. You've seen them before. Those painful inflamed patches caused when cold and damp tag-team your skin. But she doesn't hesitate. These dishes must be cleaned before they freeze into permanent artwork. Another woman carries a small tub outside. Laundry day isn't scheduled so much as dictated by necessity. When linens become too dirty, something must be done, even if that something involves stepping into the yard where the cold hits like a slap. You follow her through the doorway, and the moment the door opens, the wind slices across your face with a merciless sharpness. It steals the air from your lungs, it sneaks down the collar of your cloak, It whips your hair into your eyes. She walks straight into it, expression blank with acceptance. The washing area is little more than a wooden bench beside a trough fed by a small channel of diverted stream water. That water is now a slow-moving sheet of slush. A child stands nearby, rubbing their hands inside their sleeves and stamping their feet for warmth, giving the impression of a tiny drummer with no drum. The woman sets the tub on the bench and begins washing a linen shirt. The fabric is stiff with cold, and when she slaps it into the water, the splash sends icy droplets flying everywhere. A few land on your face, and the cold burns. She doesn't flinch. She can't. Laundry must be done quickly before the water freezes again. You watch her scrub, wring. Her breath fogs in front of her. Her hair sticks to her forehead in damp strands. She pauses occasionally to rub, her fingers under her arms for warmth, but only momentarily. The cloth needs to be rinsed. The stains won't remove themselves. Another woman appears, this one carrying a stack of children's garments. She lays them out beside the trough and begins checking each piece for wear. Some have holes, some have frayed seams, some are nearly threadbare. She separates the ones needing mending from the ones that can withstand another wash. The oldest woman, likely the grandmother, arrives last. Her hands shake from arthritis worsened by winter, but she still works. She dips a soiled cloth into the water, her entire arm tensing from the shock. But her face remains calm. She has done this her whole life. Better cold water than no water, she mutters, though her tone implies she would be perfectly happy to negotiate that deal. You look at their hands, raw, trembling. Every movement is an act of endurance. Every dip into the water is a small battle against the kind of cold that radiates through flesh and into the bone. Modern people call cold water invigorating. Medieval people called it Tuesday. Then comes brewing day. Not the festive, celebratory brewing people romanticize. This is household ale, essential because water is often unsafe to drink. The brewing process involves rinsing grains, soaking equipment, cleaning jugs, and handling barrels, all of which require water. Freezing water. A younger woman brings out a bucket for grain rinsing and tries to break through what looks like half an inch of ice. She uses a wooden mallet, tapping and then striking until the ice fractures loudly. She pushes the pieces aside and scoops out water for soaking malt. She dips her hands in. She does not scream. But she does squeeze her eyes shut for a moment, jaw clenched, shoulders raised to her ears. Then she opens her eyes and continues. The grains swirl in the bucket, the water slowly darkening as it extracts what it needs. She kneels beside it, occasionally stirring with her hands, because a wooden spoon doesn't work well for this step. Her arms turn red. Her breath turns into rapid puffs. Her body begins to shiver violently, but she keeps at it. Inside the house, more water chores continue. A woman cleans the hearth tools with a damp rag. The metal freezes her fingers on contact. She hurries through it, rubbing each tool until it gleams faintly. When she sets the tools down, her hands shake uncontrollably. She tucks them under her arms to warm them. A girl of about 12 scrubs the wooden floor near the entrance where mud, melted snow and spilled porridge have created a sticky mosaic of winter grime. She kneels on the hard-packed earth with a bucket beside her. When she dunks her cloth, she recoils, still surprised by the cold even though she's done this chore every day. She presses on, wiping the floor in slow circles, the rag freezing slightly each time she dips it back, into the water. You hear a quiet joke from one of the women, something about the water being so cold it might develop a personality and move into the house as a boarder. The others snort softly. Humour is warmth. But the joke doesn't hide the truth. Water chores are a constant threat. Cold water makes hands numb. Numb hands drop bowls. Dropped bowls break. Broken bowls reduce the household's eating utensils. Repairing bowls requires tools. Tools require maintenance. Maintenance requires water. And so the cycle repeats. Late in the afternoon, the women bring clothes inside to dry. Dry is generous. They freeze more than dry. Wet fabric becomes rigid. When one woman tries to fold a shirt, it cracks like thin parchment. She shakes her head, presses the shirt between her hands to warm it enough for folding, and hangs it near the hearth. Steam rises in thin wisps. The smell is damp wool mixed with smoke, a scent that clings to everything in winter. By now the women's hands are so cold they struggle with simple tasks. One can barely grip a needle. Another fumbles with a spoon. Someone tries to braid her hair, but her fingers won't cooperate. You watch her try twice, then give up, opting for a simple twist and knot instead. Yet water chores are not optional. They must be done daily, sometimes twice daily, and women perform them without question. Because someone has to keep the household clean enough to avoid illness. Someone has to ensure food can be prepared safely. Someone has to wash the cloths that wrap the children. Someone has to rinse the pots, the bowls, the tools, the linens, and that someone is almost always a woman. You look around and see the weariness in their faces, the set of their shoulders, the way they flex their fingers repeatedly, trying to bring feeling back, the way they wrap their shawls tighter, the way they blow into their hands before lifting another bucket. And you understand why chronic cold-related injuries, chilblains, cracked skin, joint pain, infections were so common among women. Their work required constant direct contact with icy water, day after day after day, in homes with no warm room to retreat to. You breathe, watching the fog of your exhale drift upward. Water chores freeze the body, but ignoring them would freeze the household, so women do them, and winter watches, and winter waits, and winter wins tiny battles every day, but not the war, because the women refuse to stop. The hearth crackles with a reluctant sputter, flames licking upward as if waking from a nap they didn't want to take. You move closer, hoping for warmth, but you already know the truth. Cooking in a medieval winter is not the cosy fire-warmed scene you might imagine. It's choreography performed in a freezer. Women spend hours near the hearth, yet never truly get warm. And as the morning slips into midday, the open fire becomes the centre of activity, drawing everyone in with false promises. A woman positions herself on the low stool beside the hearth. She pulls her cloak tighter around her shoulders, even though she's practically sitting inside the fire pit. The flames throw bursts of heat that feel wonderful, for 3 seconds at a time. Then the warmth disappears into the rest of the room, swallowed by the hungry cold. You can see it happen. The heat rises, hits the smoke-blackened rafters, and vanishes without ever reaching the far side of the cottage. She leans forward, putting her hands near the flames until the skin reddens. But her back is still cold. Her feet are still cold. Her arms are still cold. She is warm and freezing at the same time, which is a very medieval sensation. The pot suspended above the fire begins to simmer, not boil, not bubble enthusiastically. Just a soft simmer, as if the cold air is negotiating with the heat and winning. She stirs the stew, turnips, onions, maybe a bit of barley, maybe a scrap of salted meat if they were lucky this week. The wooden spoon clacks against the pot. She doesn't stop stirring, because stopping means sitting still. And sitting still means letting the cold bite deeper. Another woman arrives with a basket of ingredients. She sets it down and instantly flinches as a gust of wind sweeps past her ankles. The draught travels across the floor like a living thing, curling around the hearth and reaching under skirts. Women instinctively lift their feet off the floor for a moment when draughts pass, an unconscious, practiced manoeuvre, as though the cold itself is a creature they've learned to anticipate. She kneels, opens the basket and begins chopping vegetables on a low board. Her fingers flex awkwardly, the joints stiff from earlier water chores. She holds the knife with a grip that suggests she's not entirely sure whether she can trust her own hands. But the chopping continues, each thud of the blade steady and deliberate. You watch her hands, red and chapped, and wonder how she avoids slicing herself. The answer is, she doesn't always. Cuts happen, burns happen, scalds happen. Winter makes everything more dangerous. Skin stiffens, nerves dull, reflexes slow. A moment too near the fire results in a burn. A moment too near the pot results in a splash of hot broth. The cold ensures the injury hurts more and heals slower. Behind you, someone coughs. A hacking, smoke-tinged sound. You turn and see a girl tending to a small pile of firewood. She's sorting it by size, placing the driest pieces nearest the hearth. As she works, smoke drifts toward her from the fire, wrapping around her like an unwelcome scarf. She blinks rapidly, eyes watering. Smoke never rises neatly through the smoke hole. It drifts, swirls, hunts for victims. Today, she's one of them. She wipes her eyes with the back of her hand and continues. Tears streak down her cheeks, not from emotion, but from the constant smoke, assault. Over time, these conditions damage lungs. Soot builds up in nostrils. Women living much of their lives near the hearth like this often develop chronic coughs, breathing issues, and weakened immunity. But today is today, and the work must be done. The stew needs more water. It always needs more water. A woman fetches a pitcher and pours it in. The liquid hisses as it hits the hot pot, sending up a wave of warmth that momentarily fogs her face. She leans into it, stealing a few seconds of precious heat before the wave dissipates. You catch the ghost of a smile on her lips. Winter teaches you to appreciate warmth in seconds, not minutes. You hear a soft, sharp sound, the crack of wood. Someone has added a slightly damp log and the fire responds with a hiss. Damp wood means more smoke and less heat, but they don't have the luxury of being picky. The women exchange glances but say nothing. Complaining doesn't conjure dry wood. A woman rises from her stool, stretching stiff legs. She steps back from the hearth, and you can almost see the warmth leave her instantly. Her entire posture tightens as the cold envelopes her. She crosses her arms, breathes out slowly, and steels herself. Cooking now transitions into baking. Not loaves of bread, because those require ovens and wheat. Luxuries. These women bake flatbreads on heated stones near the fire. One woman prepares the dough, just barley flour and water. Her hands knead slowly, deliberately. The dough is cold to the touch, and the cold stiffens it. She kneads harder, her breath steady, her fingers aching. She shapes the dough into rounds and places them on the hot stones. The stones smoke lightly. The flatbreads crackle. The scent rises, simple, comforting, carrying the faint bitterness of barley and the faint sweetness of survival. Behind her, another woman is tending to the cauldron. She lifts the lid and stirs the contents. The steam rises, enveloping her face. Her cheeks flush pink. The warmth lasts only as long as she stays there. She mutters something under her breath about wishing the fire had manners. Another woman chuckles, the rare sound of shared humour. Jokes here are brief but bright sparks in the gloom. One woman approaches with a baby on her hip. She holds the child nearer the fire for a moment, rotating gently so all sides get some warmth, as though she's roasting a small wiggly chicken. The baby flails its arms, delighted by the flicker of light, but the mother cannot stay long. The fire is hot enough to warm, but too smoky to expose an infant for more than a minute or two. She steps back into colder air and the baby immediately whines in protest. She hushes the child, bouncing softly, rocking her weight back and forth, trying to generate heat with motion. Even this takes its toll, moving in layers, on cold joints, after an already exhausting morning. You smell something sharp. Burnt onions. A woman curses softly and adjusts the pot. The cold in the room demands constant fire management. One moment the stew is undercooking, the next it's scorching. There are no temperature knobs, no timers, just instinct and observation. Every mistake wastes ingredients the household cannot spare. As food preparation continues, another set of tasks unfolds. Brewing. Household ale must be tended during colder months, and the grain mash needs heating. This requires placing it near, but not too near the fire. A woman drags a small tub closer. She kneels, adjusting her skirt so the hem doesn't catch sparks. Her knees touch the cold floor and she winces, but she keeps working, stirring the mash with a wooden paddle until her arms tremble. Cooking over an open hearth also means dealing with constant smoke inhalation. The women cough intermittently, not because they're sick, though many are, but because the smoke swallows the room in waves. Your eyes sting, your throat scratches, but they continue as though the sensation is normal, because it is. Then comes roasting. A small piece of meat, rare, precious, likely saved for a special meal, is skewered on a spit. A girl turns the spit slowly, methodically. Her face glows orange in the firelight. Her hands shake from cold even as she works inches from flame. That paradox again, heat and cold simultaneously. She rotates the spit, monitoring for flare-ups. The meat sizzles, the fat popping like small fireworks. Each pop sends a spark upward. She flinches at the sparks but continues. A spark lands on her sleeve. She pats it out without missing a beat. Cooking takes hours, not because the food is complicated, but because the heat is insufficient. Every dish takes longer. Every step requires negotiation with the cold. Every minute near the hearth is a balance between warmth and smoke. Near evening, the room fills with the scent of stew and baked flatbread. A woman ladles portions into wooden bowls. The food steams, not because it's hot, but because the air is cold. People gather to eat. The flatbreads are chewy. The stew is thin, but it's warm. And warm food is worth more than its weight in gold right now. Women eat last, not because of custom, though custom certainly encourages it, but because they are too busy serving, tending, adjusting, cleaning, rocking, fetching. By the time they sit down, the stew has cooled significantly. Their hands wrap around the bowls and they inhale the warmth even if the food is lukewarm. Their backs are turned to the fire. Their feet remain cold. As they eat, they discuss tomorrow's chores, what ingredients need fetching, what tools need repairing, whether there's enough wood left for cooking. Winter forces every household to plan constantly, to calculate consumption, to negotiate necessity. Women do this planning in their heads while also managing every moment of cooking. Later, as dusk falls, they return to the hearth for evening tasks, reheating leftover stew, boiling water for washing, drying damp garments, warming blankets before sleep. Their faces glow in the firelight, their expressions a mixture of fatigue and determination. Cooking in a medieval winter isn't a warm, cosy pastime, it's a fight, against the cold, against the smoke, against exhaustion, against scarcity. And the women fight it daily, not because they want to, but because they must. And as you watch the fire flicker and smell the muted sweetness of simmering barley and feel the cold seep back into the room the moment the fire dips, you finally understand. The hearth is not a place of comfort. It is a battlefield, and women stand at its front lines every single day. Cold isn't just an inconvenience in medieval winter. It's a slow, creeping predator, the kind that takes its time, circles its prey, and waits for the smallest weakness before sinking its teeth in. And if there's one thing this winter has shown you again and again, it's that women are the ones the cold hunts hardest. Not because they are weaker, but because they are exposed longer, stiller, and more often. And that constant exposure has consequences. You start noticing it early in the morning, before the fire has been coaxed into its reluctant duty. A woman sits up from her straw mattress and winces. She tries to extend her fingers, but they refuse. They stay curled like claws around the invisible chill that clenched them overnight. She massages her knuckles, bending each finger slowly until they respond with a faint pop. Her joints ache fiercely, weather pain layered upon years of repetitive tasks performed in freezing air. You can tell by the tight pinch of her brow that the cold is already burrowing deep, settling itself into her bones like an unwelcome tenant. Another woman rises and takes a few steps across the floor before stopping abruptly. She presses her foot against the hearthstone, trying to warm the spots where her skin cracked during yesterday's chores. Her heels are split in thin, angry lines, tiny cuts, barely visible, but raw enough to make walking painful. Winter dryness mixed with constant dampness does that. First the skin tightens, then it flakes, then it splits, and each step afterward feels like walking on tiny blades. She grits her teeth and keeps moving anyway. There's no such thing as calling in sick when survival depends on your hands. You glance around the room, and everywhere you look you see signs of chronic cold carved into their bodies. The redness at the fingertips, the swelling around knuckles, the pale, almost bluish tint to lips when drafts slip through the shutters. Winter isn't an event here. It's a bodily condition. As water is fetched, fires tended, and breakfast prepared, you see women rub their hands constantly, not for comfort but out of necessity. They need circulation, they need sensation, they need heat, but the cold steals it faster than the body can produce it. A woman stirring the morning pot stops every few minutes to flex her fingers as though reminding them of their purpose. Her joints snap softly, tiny reminders of countless winters that have passed through her before this one. Her cough catches your attention. It's a deep, rattling cough, the kind born not from a brief illness but from years of inhaling smoke from open fires in unventilated rooms. She presses a knuckle to her lips trying to stifle the sound, but her chest trembles. The air she breathes is thick with soot, especially in winter when the fire burns nearly constantly. The smoke seeps into lungs, coats throats, irritates eyes. Every winter adds another layer, another bit of damage. You watch her chest rise and fall shallowly for a moment. Breathing hurts, but she has stew to stir, children to feed, and work to do. She takes another breath and pushes through. One woman near the wall is bent over a basket of wool, carding fibres into soft, workable clouds. Her movements are steady, but there's a stiffness in her shoulders that wasn't there before. The constant cold in the cottage stiffens muscles until even simple motion demands more effort. She shifts slightly and exhales sharply as a jolt of pain flashes through her back. She closes her eyes, waits, breathes, then resumes her work with the same gentle persistence. Chronic cold reshapes the body. It gnaws at soft tissues first, fingers, toes, ears, then burrows into joints, settling in knees, hips, shoulders. Women who grow old in these winters often walk with bent backs, not just because of age or labour, but because the cold has pulled them downward for decades. As the morning brightens, you step to the window and watch a thin layer of frost melt slightly on the inside frame. Condensation freezes here every night, and the morning sun releases it only to have it return hours later. A small girl touches the window and squeals softly, pulling her hand away as if bitten. Her skin pinks instantly. Her mother chuckles weakly and ushers her away. She knows from experience that touching anything too cold for too long means frostnip. At midday, you step outside briefly with one of the women collecting bits of wood for the fire. She shuffles slowly, boots crunching over a mix of snow and frozen mud. Her breath fogs before her, larger and thicker than those of the younger women. When she coughs again, you hear a whistle, a wheeze. It's the sound of cold tightening around lungs already weakened by age and a lifetime of smoke. She pauses to rest a moment, leaning on a wooden fence. Her hand trembles slightly as she adjusts her shawl. You realize that even the simplest task, stepping outside to gather fuel, is an ordeal. Her joints are swollen and stiff. Each step is a negotiation with pain, and winter has only begun. Inside, women return to the eternal battle with water. The youngest dips her hands into a bucket with too much determination. You hear her gasp, sharply. When she lifts her hands back out, they are red and blotchy. Water this cold doesn't merely chill skin, it shocks it. It strips natural oils, cracks the cuticles, inflames knuckles, and leaves hands raw for days. You notice small fissures around her nails, tiny but painful, and wonder how she'll manage spinning later with those same fingers. Rubbing her hands together does nothing. The cold clings. Another woman pats the girl's shoulders, whispering encouragement. Then she takes her turn with the water, plunging her hands in without flinching, though her face tightens. She has lived through enough winters that she knows the ache will fade into numbness soon. Numbness is dangerous, but it lets her work. A few feet away, an older woman massages her knees. She bends them slowly, wincing as they crack. Joint pain in winter is a constant companion. Cold makes synovial fluid thicken, stiffening joints until motion feels like grinding stone. For women who kneel, bend, stir, lift, scrub and carry every day, winter transforms those tasks into exercises in quiet suffering. A young mother nursing her infant tries to shift her posture, but her back spasms. You see her flinch, just briefly. She doesn't cry out. She doesn't pause. She keeps rocking her child. Her shoulders shake slightly from the cold and the strain, and each time her breath escapes, it forms a pale cloud that drifts over the baby's head. The infant's lips are pink for now, but the mother checks them often. This vigilance is born of experience. Babies and toddlers chill quickly in winter. Women know the signs by heart. Blue lips, cold feet, lethargy. Silence. Silence is the worst. A quiet, unusually still child is a child in danger. You watch a woman warm her toddler's hands between her own. She blows warm air across the child's fingers, rubbing gently. Her own hands shake from the cold, but she keeps at it until the child's hands pinken again. When the child laughs, she smiles back. Relief etched plainly on her face. As afternoon dims toward evening, the room grows colder. You sense it before the women say anything. The ambient warmth shrinks. The air tastes sharper. The drafts slip through new cracks. Cold presses into every surface, every object, every bone. And the health issues grow worse. A woman near the hearth rubs her ears repeatedly. The lobes are raw and chafed from cold wind earlier. She covers them with her shawl, but the cloth isn't enough. Her ears sting, then throb, then go numb. In severe winters, ear frostbite is a real threat. But she still leans close to the child she's mending a tunic for, murmuring softly as she works. Another woman dips her hands into warm water, truly warm this time, heated carefully over the fire. She's trying to increase circulation again. But when she pulls her hands out, the contrast in temperature makes her gasp. Her skin mottles, a mix of red, white, and pale, violet, chilblains. Cold has inflamed blood vessels in her fingers. There is no cure, only endurance. She wraps her hands in wool and moves on to the next task. A woman washing a pot touches her cheek and winces. You notice the skin there is dry to the point of flaking, thin, irritated. In winter, faces are always exposed. Windburn, cold burn, cracked lips. These are everyday afflictions. She applies a smear of animal fat to the irritated spot. It helps only marginally. And then there are the deeper consequences, the ones you only see after watching closely for hours. A nagging cough that never goes away. Shoulders held stiffly as though bracing for impact. Fingers that no longer straighten fully. Cheeks hollowed slightly by months of cold-induced hunger when food becomes scarce. Dark circles under eyes worn from nights spent waking with children, tending fires, rubbing limbs, soothing pain. And still they push forward. Winter doesn't allow weakness. Not in homes like these. Men get sick too, of course, but men move. Men generate heat. Men spend hours outdoors where exertion keeps blood flowing. Women do precision tasks, indoor tasks, still tasks, cold tasks, and so the cold attacks them differently, more deeply, more silently, more chronically. As evening settles and the house prepares for another long night, you notice something you hadn't before, a subtle limp in one woman's walk. She favours one leg. It might be an old injury made worse by cold. It might be joint inflammation. It might be nerve pain from years of kneeling on frozen floors. She tucks a blanket under her hips before sitting for the night. But the cold will find her anyway. Another cough erupts, low, gravelly. It echoes briefly before being swallowed by the darkness. A woman nearby rubs the coffer's back. A small gesture, familiar, compassion mixed with resignation. Winter illness isn't usually dramatic. It's slow, it's steady. It lingers until it becomes part of the season itself. You watch them all settle near the faint glow of the fire, their faces half lit, half shadowed. You see the fatigue, the pain, the courage, and you finally understand. The cold doesn't kill instantly. It chips away. It takes a finger's feeling, a joint's mobility, a lung's capacity, an hour's sleep, a day's strength, a season's ease. Piece by piece, winter reshapes women's bodies into landscapes marked by survival. The cold takes. The women endure, and somehow, despite everything, they continue. The wind outside howls like a living thing, rattling the shutters with a kind of gleeful malice, and you realise, with the sinking awareness of someone who has grown far too accustomed to freezing indoors, that today is market day. Not because anyone wants it, not because it makes sense to leave the house in a winter like this, but because necessity doesn't wait for warmer weather. Food must be traded, tools must be repaired, goods must be sold, and women, especially poorer women, are among the first to step outside and face the cold head-on. A woman tightens her cloak, pulling the wool tighter around her shoulders. The fabric is thin from years of wear. Her breath fogs as she exhales slowly, both bracing herself and trying to stay calm. Market days are long, cold, exhausting, and absolutely vital. She checks the items in her basket. A few skeins of spun wool, a bundle of dried herbs, some extra turnips. Nothing extravagant, but these small goods might fetch enough to purchase salt or grain to keep the household fed for another week. Giving the basket one last adjustment, she pushes open the door and steps out, into a world transformed into a bone-cold battlefield. You follow her, and the cold slams into you instantly. It slices across your cheeks, threads icy fingers down your collar, stings your eyes. You swallow an involuntary gasp. She doesn't. She simply lowers her chin, narrows her eyes against the wind, and trudges forward. Her boots crunch across the snow in a rhythm that says she's used to this. Winter has trained her, hardened her. You, on the other hand, are still wondering if frostbite can travel by ambition. She walks past other cottages, where figures emerge from doorways, women wrapped in shawls carrying baskets, swinging small bundles of wool, herbs, eggs, or linen. Their steps are steady, though their bodies shake. The path toward the village centre is lined with snowbanks that grow taller each week. The wind whips snow sideways in small, angry spirals. One woman pulls her hood down further to protect her ears. Another wraps an extra cloth over her face, even though it makes breathing harder. Little jokes slip into your mind, something about medieval winter being nature's way of reminding everyone that warmth is a privilege. But the women trudging toward the market aren't in the mood. Their faces are set in the expression of people who know cold intimately, who have lost things to it, who have felt cold become part of their identity. Once the market square comes into view, its starkness hits you. Stalls sit half empty. Snow has drifted into corners, accumulating around legs of tables and crates. The few merchants who've braved the cold stand hunched over, wrapped in multiple furs or thick woolens that make them look more like walking bundles than humans. A butcher, already wrapped in 2 cloaks, rubs his hands vigorously, trying to keep his cleaver grip steady. A potter covers his wares with cloth to prevent frost cracks. Smoke from a distant brazier curls upward into the grey sky. But the busiest section of the market is where the women gather. They form small circles, trading quietly, negotiating prices with a mix of practicality and grit. The cold sucks the warmth from their cheeks, turning them pale. Their fingers stiffen around baskets, breath fogs, between them like small clouds of unspoken complaints. Your woman steps into the fold and sets down her basket, arranging the skeins of wool with care. She greets another woman with a nod. No long conversation. Keeping one's mouth open in this kind of cold is punishment. A customer approaches her stall, an older woman wrapped in a heavy cloak with rawhide boots. She inspects the wool, running cracked fingers along each strand. They haggle briefly. The price is low, too low, but winter isn't a season of good bargains for the poor. Goods sell cheap and needs remain expensive. Still, a few coins slip into your woman's hand, and she tucks them deep inside her cloak, close to her body where warmth can keep the metal from freezing to her skin. Nearby, a younger woman struggles to hold a squirming toddler while also negotiating over a jar of dried mint. The toddler whines, his nose red, cheeks chapped, small hands trembling. The mother bounces him gently, though the movement appears stiff and pained. She's cold. He's cold. They all are. But staying home isn't an option. Children don't stop needing food because their mothers freeze. The women cluster closer together as the wind picks up, instinctively forming a barrier against the cold. Cloaks overlap. Shawls brush. Shoulders press together. They trade warmth the way they trade goods, quietly, efficiently, without remarking on it. One woman jokes that if they all stood any closer, they'd be married by spring. There's laughter, small, fragile, but real. Laughter is warmth, too. You spot a girl perhaps 12 years old standing beside a basket of eggs, her feet shifting constantly inside her thin shoes. She's trying to keep her toes from going numb. A buyer approaches. The girl's voice shakes slightly as she names her price. Not from fear, from cold. The buyer examines the eggs, picks one up and nods. Coins exchange hands. The girl smiles faintly before tucking her hands back under her armpits. Then comes the wind again. It sweeps through the market with a roar, nearly knocking a few women off balance. Snow whirls around them. A woman loses her grip on her shawl and scrambles to catch it before the wind drags it across the square. Another holds down her baskets as the wind tries to flip them. Everyone leans into the gusts like trees in a storm. When the wind finally calms, the women straighten, exchange glances and return to trading, as though nothing happened. Standing still at the market is dangerous. Cold settles into legs, climbs up spines, numbs fingers. Women shift from foot to foot constantly. They stamp their boots lightly, rub their hands, pull shawls closer. Some huddle near the brazier. Its warmth, pitifully small, but better than nothing. Steam rises from the damp hems of their skirts as they hold them close to the heat. A commotion draws your attention. A woman slips on a patch of ice while carrying a basket of turnips. She falls hard, her knees hitting the frozen ground. Several women rush to her. They help her up. Someone rubs her arms. Someone retrieves the turnips that scattered across the snow. No one scolds her. No one moves on. In medieval winter, solidarity is survival. The woman tries to stand fully, but her face grimaces. Her knee is already swelling. An injury like that could linger for months. Still, she thanks the others, rearranges her cloak and limps back to her stall. Winter does not pause for pain. Meanwhile, your woman finishes her trading and begins gathering her purchases. A small sack of barley, a bit of salt, a few dried beans. Each item represents decisions made in cold, literal and financial. She checks her basket, adjusts her cloak and prepares for the journey home. The path back is worse. The wind has grown bold. Snow blows sideways. The skies a dull, heavy grey that promises another storm. You follow her, she bends forward, shoulders hunched, gripping her basket with both hands. The cold is so sharp it feels like a physical weight pressing against her. Her feet slip occasionally. Each time she steadies herself without stopping. Stopping means freezing. A younger girl walks ahead of her, dragging a small bundle of firewood strapped with rope. Her face is red and tear-stained from the wind. She keeps wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears freeze almost instantly. The older woman behind her calls out encouragement. Not loudly, the wind would steal her voice, but enough for the girl to hear faintly. The yard of the cottage appears at last, but even that final stretch is work. Snow drifts block the path. The women climb over them, sinking up to their shins. Their breath grows ragged, their steps slow, their baskets heavier with each passing second. Inside, the cottage is cold, but compared to outside, it feels almost merciful. The fire is barely alive, but embers glow. She sets down her basket. Her shoulders drop with exhaustion. Her toes have gone numb. Her fingers have stiffened. Her cheeks sting. Her joints ache. And yet, she smiles faintly as she distributes the barley, the salt, the beans. These meagre purchases will keep the family going. Another woman helps her remove her cloak, shaking off the snow. They exchange a brief nod, silent acknowledgement of the day's ordeal. And just like that, the work continues. Women don't stop moving because they've been outside all day in freezing wind. They stretch their fingers. They tend the hearth. They warm food. They check on children. They mend cloaks. They prepare for tomorrow. Going to market is not a break from domestic labour. It is an extension of it, done outdoors, in harsher conditions, in colder winds, with longer consequences. You watch her rub her hands near the hearth, trying to coax feeling back into them. Winter has taken its tax today, but tomorrow she'll go out again, and the next day, and the next. Because in medieval winter, women work both inside and outside the home, freezing twice as much, sacrificing twice as often, and carrying the burden of survival on shoulders weary from cold. They endure the wind, they endure the snow, they endure the cold that never leaves their bones, and somehow they still return home with enough to keep everyone else alive. By the time evening shadows stretch long across the cottage floor, the cold has established itself as the unquestioned ruler of the household. It sits in the corners, lurks in the rafters, slides down the walls in ghost-like draughts. But the cold alone doesn't dictate who suffers most inside these medieval homes. Social norms, quiet, rigid, deeply ingrained, shape the invisible hierarchy of warmth, and women, despite doing nearly all the work that keeps the fire alive, are placed at the bottom of a system that decides who is allowed to feel warm and who must endure the cold as a matter of routine. You begin noticing it during the twilight meal when the household gathers around the hearth. The fire burns low. It always burns low in winter, because wood is precious and must be rationed. But even a small fire creates a bubble of warmth just large enough for a few bodies. That bubble becomes the most valuable real estate in the house, and access to it is governed by custom. A man returns from outdoor chores, his cloak stiff with frost, his boots soaked from trudging through snow. He moves directly to the warmest spot near the fire, hooks his cloak over a small wooden peg, and stretches his hands toward the flame. No one questions it. After all, he needs to dry his clothes, warm his blood, loosen his joints. Outdoor work earns fire proximity. A child is placed next to him, because children must be shielded from the cold before it sinks too deeply into their small, vulnerable bodies. The child's cheeks are flushed, his nose running, his fingers trembling as he lifts a wooden spoon. He's given the best heat in the room without hesitation. On the other side of the hearth sits the grandmother. Age earns warmth. Elders feel cold more intensely, their joints stiff and swollen. She rubs her knees, guiding her palms slowly over the aching joints. The firelight glows across her wrinkled face like a blessing. She's seen too many winters not to take this small comfort when it is offered. You glance around. The mothers, the daughters, the women who prepared the meal, coaxed the fire awake, hauled the water, chopped the turnips and baked the flatbread. They sit farther back, always farther back. One woman moves into a spot that's almost warm, just past the immediate glow. She places her bowl in her lap, blows on the stew and takes a bite. A moment later, a child toddles over, whining softly, and she shifts automatically, giving up the warmer spot to pull the child into her lap. Her own legs slide into colder air. Another woman sits near the drafty wall, where cold leaks in through the cracks of wattle and daub. She tucks her feet beneath her, trying to keep them off the icy floor. She eats quickly, before her stew cools into a lukewarm broth. When the draught gusts, she hunches instinctively, pulling her shawl tightly across her shoulders, No one orders her to sit there. She simply knows. Warmth is distributed by unwritten rules embedded in everyday life. Men returning from labour are warmed first. Children are warmed early. Elders are warmed always. Women warm themselves only when there is warmth left over, and there rarely is. You observe seating patterns more closely. The hearth's heat reaches about 3 feet with any strength. That radius is sacred territory. Within it sit the people whose roles society deems most in need of warmth. Slightly beyond it sit the older daughters, girls old enough to help with weaving, mending, cooking and washing. They steal glances toward the fire but don't move closer unless called. Their thin wool shawls do little against the creeping chill. Farther still, in the cold outer ring near the wall, sit the women doing post-meal tasks, wiping wooden bowls, checking infants' blankets, braiding children's hair for the night. Their breath fogs faintly as they work. The cold is sharper here. Their fingers fumble, their joints ache, but they keep working because someone has to. The warmth won't reach them no matter how long they sit. Once the fire dies down, the hierarchy only becomes more pronounced. A woman reaches for a scrap of firewood, judging whether she dares place it on the embers. Wood is running low. She hesitates, uses a sliver instead of a log. The men have fallen quiet now, tired from the day's labour, warming their feet near the fire. A child climbs into one man's lap. The grandmother begins a soft story. The hearth crackles softly. The woman who tended the fire all day remains several feet back, rubbing her cold hands together. Warmth is given to her only once everyone else has received enough, and even then it is not truly given. It is noticed. You look more closely at the women's posture. They sit with shoulders slightly bowed, hands tucked into sleeves, feet drawn close to their bodies. Their movements are deliberate and minimal, conserving heat the way others conserve wood. They know exactly how much warmth their bodies produce and how quickly it escapes. You watch as a younger woman gets up to adjust the shutter. The cold gust that enters the room hits her first. She absorbs it silently. She wedges a bit of wool into a gap, presses the wood tight, and turns back toward the room. But she doesn't return to the warm side. She simply resumes her seat in the cold ring without comment. Because the hierarchy is in her bones. Later, as bedtime draws near, another ritual plays out, this time around the embers. The fire is prepared for the night, covered with ash, tucked carefully so it might survive until morning. This task falls to a woman, always. And yet once she finishes tending the fire, she does not stay beside it. She moves to the coldest part of the sleeping area, making space for children and elders in the slightly warmer spots. It's not spoken, it's understood. The fire keeps the family alive, the women keep the fire alive, and the women sleep farthest from it. You witness a small moment that illustrates everything. A child cries in the middle of the night, chilled by a sudden draught. The woman closest to the wall rises instantly, even though she's already stiff with cold. She gathers the child and brings them nearer the fire, but she does not stay there. She settles back into her freezing corner once the child is warm. Not an ounce of warmth for herself, just enough for the child. And this isn't just within one home. This hierarchy repeats across villages, across classes, across generations. Even wealthier households observe versions of the same pattern. Servant women sleep in the coldest servant quarters. Female labourers work near drafty entryways. Nurses tending children sit near windows left open for fresh air, despite freezing themselves. Warmth is a privilege tied to status, age and occupation, and women occupy the lowest tier. But there's another layer too: modesty. In medieval society, modesty rules extend into domestic life. Women rarely stretch out fully near the fire. They sit with legs tucked, shoulders rounded, shawls pulled down. Taking too much space near the fire is seen as unseemly. Heat, like status, must be used modestly. Men stretch, lean back, spread their cloaks wide to dry. Women fold inward. Even warmth is gendered. As the night deepens, the cold becomes a presence you can almost hear. A thin, persistent whistle through the cracks of the house. Women curl together on their straw beds, sharing heat in small, quiet clusters. Their breath fogs the air. Their bodies shiver beneath layers of wool. But even in this shared space, hierarchy persists. A woman with an infant pulls her child close, absorbing the cold through her own body so the baby does not feel it. A girl sleeps between two siblings, positioned like a heat bridge. A grandmother is placed near the centre of the cluster, where warmth is most stable. The mothers take the edges. They always take the edges. You watch one woman shift through the night to block a draft coming through a crack in the wall. She presses her back against the cold air so others don't feel it. The cold hits her full force, but she doesn't move. Because this is the unspoken rule. Women protect the household from the cold by being the ones who endure it. They are the human insulation in homes that lack insulation. They are the warmth givers in rooms that do not give warmth back. And each winter reinforces the same truth. The fire belongs to the household. The household belongs to survival, and women belong to the cold spaces that make everyone else warm. The cold clings to the walls like a stubborn spirit, but today, finally, mercifully, you see women fighting back, not with strength, not with speed, but with ingenuity. Quiet, clever, practical strategies built from whatever scraps the medieval world allows. Strategies born of desperation, yes, but also of genius. For centuries, women have learned how to coax warmth out of objects no one else would bother with. This is the chapter of survival that never makes it into illuminated manuscripts, but it should, because this is where women turn a freezing house into something barely livable. You first notice it in the morning, when a woman kneels by the hearth with something metal in her hands. A squat little pot with holes in its lid. A brazier. Small enough to carry, sturdy enough to hold embers. She scoops a few glowing coals from the hearth with a practiced flick of her wrist and lowers them into the brazier. Instantly it radiates a tiny sphere of heat, no larger than a dinner plate. But for a woman whose hands have been stiff since dawn, this is a miracle. She presses her palms against its sides and exhales a slow, relieved sigh. The warmth doesn't last long, not with embers this small, but even a few minutes means better circulation. Less pain, less chance her fingers will split open while spinning or mending. Another woman sits beside her and stretches her toes toward the brazier, letting heat seep through the thin leather of her shoes. Several women share it in turn. The brazier circles the room like a humble blessing. Nearby, a younger girl rummages through a basket of cloth scraps, bits of old tunics, shredded hems, unravelling sleeves. She sorts them quickly, separating the driest pieces. You wonder why until you see her pull out a small worn pouch. She stuffs the scraps into it and ties it shut, a makeshift hand warmer. She passes it to an older woman who tucks it inside her sleeves. The scraps hold heat well after being warmed near the fire, and even when they cool, they block drafts. A small invention, a big difference. Another trick appears when two women sit down with their spinning tools. Usually spinning is done near the coldest walls, because it's not considered essential enough to claim hearth space. But today, they do something clever. They angle their stools so the spinning wheels are slightly behind them, while their bodies face the fire. The wheels receive enough light, while their fronts absorb what little heat the hearth can spare. The women's shawls act like heat traps, catching any warmth drifting upward and folding it back toward their bodies. It's not perfect, it's not even comfortable, but it's warmer. A woman washing dishes in the back corner of the cottage adopts her own strategy. Instead of filling a bucket with freezing water, she heats a small amount, near the fire until it reaches a lukewarm temperature. It's not enough to scrub everything at once, so she rotates. Wash a bowl, dump the water, heat another batch, wash another bowl. It's slow. Wasteful by medieval standards. But the warmth saves her fingers and the soap and cloth work better in heat than in ice. The other women watch her closely, some skeptically, some admiringly. Then one quietly begins doing the same. Cleverness spreads like warmth. You also see them practice what can only be described as strategic layering, a fashion so tactical it deserves its own military manual. One woman wraps linen strips around her wrists before pulling her sleeves down, sealing the gap where cold always sneaks in. Another woman layers 2 aprons, not because she needs both, but because each apron traps a thin layer of warm air. One mother wraps her infant in 3 fabrics, a thin linen underlayer to keep skin dry, a woolen swaddle for insulation, and a scratchy outer cloth to block drafts. She checks the child's lips every few minutes. Pink lips mean safety. Pale lips mean danger. These small hacks form an invisible shield against the winter, not enough to make life comfortable, just enough to prevent collapse. But the cleverness doesn't end with clothing or fire. It extends to how they reorganize their entire living space. You watch as 2 women drag a few wooden stools closer together and drape a large woolen blanket over them. A makeshift tent. A heat cave. The fire warms the air beneath it more effectively because the blanket traps the warmth that would otherwise vanish into the rafters. Children crawl underneath, giggling at the novelty. The women crawl underneath too, though less giggling is involved. Inside, the difference in temperature is subtle, but unmistakable. A few degrees warmer can mean the difference between numb fingers and functioning ones, between restless sleep and a few precious hours of peace. Then comes the moment you least expect: communal sleeping arrangements, optimized. The women adjust their sleeping positions, placing the mother with the youngest child in the warmest inner spot of the shared bedding cluster. Another woman positions herself on the edge nearest the door, not because she's least important, but because she is the most resilient to cold. She's known for being hardy, strong. Born in winter, someone jokes. She smirks, but you see the truth in her stiff posture. The joke costs her warmth. She accepts it anyway. One older woman spreads her cloak across all of them, turning her garment into a shared blanket. Another cracks a joke about how if warmth were currency, they'd all be rich by now. Rich in drafts, someone replies, and laughter fills the room softly, warming the air in its own small way. Humour too is a coping strategy. Not all strategies involve manipulating the fire or rearranging the household. Some involve altering routines entirely. When spinning becomes too cold for fingers, women switch to tasks involving larger muscles, kneading dough, pounding grain, hauling buckets. Movement generates heat. When a mother senses the cold settling into her bones, she wraps the baby around her torso and walks slowly around the cottage, swaying, humming. The movement keeps them both warm enough to survive the chill. Older girls often volunteer to gather fuel, not because it's easier — walking through snow-laden woods is miserable — but because the physical exertion warms their limbs far more than sitting and spinning. They return to the cottage red-cheeked, panting, alive with movement. The women inside envy the heat in their faces, even though they know the cold will reclaim it within minutes. Another clever trick reveals itself when the sun appears, an elusive guest in winter. The women immediately bring out damp linens and lay them across a wooden rack near the small patch of sunlight that crawls across the floor. Sun warming isn't much, but in winter every bit of warmth matters. The heat helps dry cloth faster and reduces mildew, which keeps sickness at bay. You watch as women share advice with each other, small pieces of wisdom honed by seasons of suffering. Don't put your feet too close to the brazier. Warm them slow or you'll crack them. Keep a stone by the fire. Put it in your bed before sleep. Wrap your hair tight. Wind steals heat from your scalp first. Keep your sleeves stuffed with the wool scraps. It fools the cold. These insights pass from grandmother to mother to daughter, like heirlooms. No one writes them down, but every woman knows them. Then you see something even more astonishing: community ingenuity. 2 women from a neighbouring cottage arrive with a tool one of their husbands made, a wooden frame lined with strips of wool shaped like a box missing one side. They place it near the hearth, angled so that the fire's warmth fills the box. A child sits inside, curled like a small cat. The box traps heat, creating a microclimate far warmer than the surrounding air. Other children watch with wide eyes. Mothers watch too, already planning how to make one of their own. Nearby, a woman emerges with a small clay pot. She fills it with hot ashes from the hearth, carefully, precisely, and places the pot under her skirts while she works. A personal heater. She keeps it balanced between her feet, warming her legs and torso. Another woman admires the idea but frowns slightly. "Too risky," she murmurs. "Burned myself last year." The other shrugs and smiles. Survival always involves risk, but nothing compares to the collective ingenuity displayed when one woman's child coughs through the afternoon. The women gather around the mother, touching the child's forehead. They confer quietly, exchanging knowledge. One woman offers dried thyme for a steam infusion. Another mixes warm ale with a spoonful of honey. A third fetches a cloth to wrap the child's chest. Together, their combined strategies create warmth not just for the child, but for the mother too, who relaxes for the first time in hours. Warmth is communal in winter, and women, always women, are the ones who build it. What fascinates you most, though, are the winter-specific tricks so subtle you'd miss them if you weren't paying attention. Women rub fat, rendered animal tallow, into their hands and faces to trap heat and moisture. They line their shoes with moss and wool scraps. They tuck small stones heated by the fire into their pockets. They drink warm broth even when hungry for solid food, because liquid heat spreads faster through the body. They speak kindly to each other more often in winter, because kindness softens the cold's grip in ways wool never can. And through all this, you see a quiet determination, a refusal to let winter win, a conviction that survival isn't just possible, but necessary, expected, normal. Women in medieval winter don't just endure, they adapt, they invent, they share, they protect, and they keep the fragile balance of household warmth alive through sheer willpower and ingenuity. Their bodies may freeze, but their minds stay warm, and in a world built of cold, that warmth is its own kind of fire. You wake to the hushed quiet that comes only after a night of heavy snow, the soft, muffled silence that makes the whole world feel padded, as though wrapped in wool. The cottage still breathes faintly under its blanket of cold. Women begin to stir, slowly, cautiously, their limbs stiff from another night spent in icy corners, their joints reluctant to move. You feel it too, the way winter sinks into your body, becoming part of your weight. But today feels different. Not warmer, not kinder, just slower. As if the season itself is pausing long enough for everyone to exhale. A few women linger on their straw mattresses wrapped in cloaks and shawls, their breath rising in thin, ghostly wisps. The fire has survived the night only barely. A few embers cling to life beneath the ash. A woman kneels to coax it awake, and the tiny sound of crackling is strangely comforting, as familiar as a heartbeat. While she works, others begin their slow morning rituals, stretching frozen fingers, rubbing calves stiff from cold, massaging shoulders that ache from hours spent curled into tight knots. One woman gently lifts her sleeping child, careful not to disturb the fragile bubble of warmth preserved in the shared bedding. Another checks on an elder's breathing, brushing frost from her shawl with tender fingers. Outside, the sky's pale and heavy, filled with the kind of light that makes everything look softer. Snow drifts against the door. The cold prowls quietly, but it feels less aggressive today, more watchful than cruel. The women move through the cottage with calm familiarity. They straighten, blankets, shake out shawls, arrange the morning's chores, the same tasks, the same movements, yet there is a grounding rhythm to it, a rhythm that has carried women through winter after winter, year after year. It is the rhythm of survival, of memory, of knowledge passed like a quiet inheritance from one generation to the next. A young girl rises and begins brushing frost off the window frame with a sprig of dried lavender. The tiny flakes fall like shimmering dust. She pauses to trace a fingertip through the faintest frost pattern, a delicate web of ice crystals that almost looks like embroidery, For a moment the room feels enchanted, as if winter has left them a small gift. The older women smile at her wonder. They've seen this hundreds of times, but the sight still softens their faces. Not everything winter brings is suffering. Sometimes it offers stillness, sometimes beauty, and sometimes simply the permission to breathe more slowly. You move toward the hearth where the fire finally catches, releasing gentle ribbons of warmth. A woman sits nearby, palms open toward the glow, and for once she doesn't move immediately to her chores. She simply sits. The others don't rush her. They let her have this moment, because in a life ruled by cold, moments like this are worth more than food. She lifts her face toward the fire, and for the first time you notice the quiet strength etched into her features, not the sharp, desperate strength of survival, but the softer strength of someone who has learned how to bend without breaking. Around her, the women settle into their morning tasks slowly, mending here, sorting wool there, checking children's clothing for weak seams. There's a warmth in the air that doesn't come from the fire. It comes from them, from the way they speak softly to one another, from the way they move in sync, from the way they share everything: heat, burdens, chores, jokes, silence. A mother braids her daughter's hair, fingers moving with patience that belies the cold. A grandmother tells a quiet story about winters long past, her voice raspy but steady. The younger women listen with half smiles, pausing in their work to absorb the memories threaded through her words. Every winter leaves a mark, every winter teaches something new, and every winter becomes part of the long unbroken chain of women who endured, adapted, and carried their households through seasons that tried their best to swallow them whole. You watch as one woman rises and begins reorganizing the room, pulling blankets close to the hearth, adjusting the stools, preparing the space for another day of work. Her movements are gentle, unhurried. She glances around the room, taking stock of everyone's needs before her own. The cold will return, the drafts will return, the harshness will return. But in this moment, she gives herself permission to move more slowly, more softly. Another woman hands her a warmed stone wrapped in wool, just a simple kindness, offered without words. She presses it to her chest and closes her eyes for a moment. Warmth blooms beneath her shawl. In the corner, two girls share a quiet laugh as they practice spinning together. Their hands tremble slightly from the chill, but the laughter steadies them, smoothing the edges of the morning frost. Women have always found warmth where they can, in shared labour, in shared stories, in shared breaths rising together like small clouds. Winter pushes them to the edges of endurance, but they draw one another back again and again into the circle of survival. You feel the cottage breathe around you. Creaking beams, faint crackles from the fire, soft whispers of wool and linen shifting through fingers. Everything slows, everything softens. A woman drapes a heavy cloak over your shoulders. The wool smells faintly of smoke and lavender. She smiles with tired eyes but warm intention. You sit beside her as the fire grows brighter, and the world outside remains frozen in quiet stillness. And here, inside this fragile, draughty cottage, you find yourself wrapped in a different kind of warmth. A warmth made from resilience, from shared burdens, from softness in the face of brutal cold, from women who have learned how to bend winter without letting it break them. Their stories survive because they survived. Their strength endures because they endured. And even as winter refuses to yield, they find ways to carve out small spaces of heat, hope, and humanity. The fire settles into a low burn, its glow dimming into a quiet ember hum. Around you, the women begin to slow their movements even further, breaths deepening, voices softening, gestures growing languid and unhurried. The cold still lingers along the floor and walls, but it feels less oppressive now, softened by the presence of these women who learned long ago how to make peace with winter's endless night. You breathe with them, slow, long, warm exhales that fog faintly in the chilled air. Someone adjusts a blanket over her lap, Another tucks a shawl beneath her chin. A child curls against a mother's side, drifting towards sleep. The whole room shifts into a softer rhythm, like a lullaby woven of wool and silence. The wind outside loses its sharpness, becoming a distant whisper instead of a threat. Snow settles gently against the door. The cottage creaks with familiar sounds, wood expanding, thatch settling, the faint sigh of warming air along the beams. You let your shoulders drop. Your hands rest softly in your lap. Your breath moves in quiet waves. The women speak only in murmurs now, exchanging final thoughts, small smiles, shared glances of understanding. No rush, no urgency, just the calm that settles when a difficult day has been endured, when survival is certain for one more night. The fire's glow paints golden arcs across the rafters, and the room seems to exhale with you. Warmth spreading just a little farther, light lingering just a little longer. You close your eyes, listen to the soft crackle of embers, feel the steady warmth near your skin. Let the cold outside fade into a distant memory. Rest now. Breathe. The night is gentle for once, and morning can wait.